Have you ever stopped to consider what truly makes a legend? Not just in the stories we tell around campfires or the myths passed down through generations, but what transforms an ordinary being into something extraordinary, something that transcends the boundaries of normal existence. In the vast, interconnected world of Pokémon, some creatures rise far above the rest. They don't simply exist within the world. They shape it, mold it, and in some cases, they are the very reason the world exists at all. These are the legendary Pokémon. These are the mythical Pokémon. And their stories, woven together across 9 generations of games, form an intricate narrative that spans creation itself, reaches into the depths of antimatter and alternate dimensions, and stretches forward into futures that may or may not come to pass. But before we embark on this journey through time, space, and the very fabric of reality, we need to understand something fundamental. What exactly separates a legendary Pokémon from a mythical one? Why do we place these beings into different categories? And what does that distinction tell us about their role in the grand narrative of the Pokémon world? The answer lies not in their power, though many possess abilities that could reshape continents or rewrite the laws of physics. It doesn't rest solely in their rarity, though encountering one in the wild is an experience few trainers can claim. The distinction runs deeper into the very nature of how these beings interact with the world and how the world remembers them. Legendary Pokémon are the cornerstones of regional mythology. They are the subjects of ancient texts, the focus of religious worship, the beings whose names echo through the halls of museums and libraries. Their existence is acknowledged, even if their actual sightings remain few and far between. They are the guardians of sacred places, the harbingers of natural disasters, the maintainers of cosmic balance. People know they exist. Trainers seek them out. Villainous teams plot to capture them. Their presence shapes policy, influences architecture, and defines entire cultures. Mythical Pokémon, in contrast, operate in the spaces between certainty and legend. They are the whispers in the dark, the creatures so rarely seen that many question whether they exist at all. Even within the Pokémon world itself, mythical Pokémon are subjects of debate among professors and scientists. Are they real or merely folklore? Did that traveler truly encounter Mew in the jungles of Guyana? Or was it a trick of the light and an overactive imagination? The line between myth and reality blurs when dealing with these beings, and that ambiguity is part of what makes them special. In the earlier days of Pokémon, this distinction wasn't always clear. Many fans, and even some official sources, treated mythical Pokémon as simply a subset of legendary Pokémon. But from Generation 5 onward, the two categories became distinctly defined in all official media. Legendary Pokémon could be encountered through normal gameplay, their presence woven into the story. Mythical Pokémon, on the other hand, were often distributed through special events, limited time promotions, or exclusive giveaways, reinforcing their status as beings that exist beyond the normal flow of the game world. This distinction tells us something important about how we're meant to perceive these creatures. Legendary Pokémon are forces you can challenge, beings you can face. If you're determined enough, skilled enough, and fortunate enough, you can encounter them. You can battle them. You can, with the right approach, even capture them and make them part of your team. They are powerful, yes, but they exist within the world's rules. Mythical Pokémon, however, seem to exist slightly outside those rules. They appear when they choose to appear. They vanish just as mysteriously. Some possess the ability to travel through time, granting wishes, or manipulate the very essence of life itself. Their power often seems more conceptual, more abstract than the straightforward might of their legendary counterparts. Understanding this distinction helps us appreciate the full scope of what we're about to explore. Over the course of the next several hours, we're going to journey through 9 generations of Pokémon games, examining the lore, history, and significance of every single legendary and mythical Pokémon that has been introduced. We'll trace creation myths back to their origins. We'll witness the birth of the universe itself. We'll explore alternate dimensions, future timelines, and ancient pasts. We'll meet guardians of islands, protectors of forests, embodiments of ideals, and creatures that exist as living paradoxes. This isn't simply a catalogue of powerful Pokémon. This is the story of how the Pokémon world came to be, how it's maintained, and how it continues to evolve. Each legendary and mythical Pokémon we encounter has played a role in shaping the world as trainers know it. Some created the fundamental forces of physics. Others maintain the delicate balance between life and death. Still others represent the hopes, dreams, fears, and ideals of the people who share the world with them. As of Generation 9, there are over 90 legendary and mythical Pokémon combined. And that number continues to grow with each new game, each new region, each new expansion of the lore. That's nearly 10% of all known Pokémon species, a testament to how important these beings are to the franchise's identity and storytelling. Our journey will follow a chronological path through the regions, starting in Kanto, where it all began, and following the thread of legendary encounters through Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, and finally, Paldea. Along the way, we'll discover how the lore connects across regions, how myths from one area reference or reflect myths from another, and how the entire legendary ecosystem forms a cohesive narrative about the nature of the Pokémon universe. We'll examine not just the Pokémon themselves, but the stories surrounding them, the ancient civilizations that worshipped them, the modern teams that seek to exploit them, the environmental and cosmic forces they represent, the relationships between different legendary groups, the hierarchies of power that exist among beings who themselves seem to exist beyond normal hierarchies. Whether you're here to fall asleep to the soothing recounting of beloved stories, to study the deep lore of your favorite games, or simply to appreciate the rich mythology that Game Freak has built over more than 2 decades, this comprehensive exploration will cover everything you need to know about the most powerful, most mysterious, and most significant Pokémon in existence. So settle in, get comfortable. Let your mind open to the possibilities of a world where beings of immense power shape reality itself, where time and space are mutable concepts controlled by ancient dragons, where the line between Pokémon and deity blurs into something altogether more fascinating. Our journey begins where all Pokémon journeys began, in the Kanto region, where three majestic birds claimed dominion over the elements, where a tragic tale of scientific ambition gone wrong created one of the most powerful Pokémon ever known, and where hidden in the depths of an ancient jungle, a single pink cat-like creature held the genetic secret to all Pokémon life. This is the complete history and lore of every legendary and mythical Pokémon. Let's begin. The Kanto region holds a special place in Pokémon history. It's where the phenomenon began, where millions of trainers first set out on their journeys, where the concept of catching, training, and bonding with powerful creatures first captured the imagination of people around the world. And it's fitting, then, that Kanto introduced the world to its first legendary Pokémon, setting the template for everything that would come after. But here's something interesting. The legendary Pokémon of Kanto weren't initially planned to be as integral to the story as later legendaries would become. They existed more as rare, powerful encounters, secrets to be discovered rather than plot-critical beings. Mewtwo lurked in the depths of Cerulean Cave, accessible only to trainers who had proven themselves by defeating the Elite Four. The three legendary birds could be found in their respective domains, guardian forces of nature that seemed to exist independently of the main narrative. This approach gave the Kanto legendaries a sense of mystery and discovery that resonates even today. You didn't encounter them because the story demanded it. You encountered them because you explored, because you pushed beyond the boundaries of the obvious path, because you sought out the myths and legends you'd heard while whispered about in towns and cities across the region. Let's begin with the being that started it all, though most trainers didn't realize it at the time. Deep in the unexplored jungles of South America, in a region called Guyana, a team of scientists made a discovery that would change their understanding of Pokémon evolution forever. They found a new species, a Pokémon unlike any they had encountered before. Small, pink, and seemingly playful, this Pokémon possessed something remarkable. Within its DNA lay the genetic information of every single Pokémon species known to exist. This was Mew, the new species Pokémon, and according to the research, it represented nothing less than the common ancestor of all Pokémon. Think about the implications of that for a moment. Every Charizard and Blastoise, every Pikachu and Eevee, every powerful dragon and tiny bug type, all of them could trace their evolutionary lineage back to this single ancient being. Mew was quite literally the origin point of Pokémon biodiversity. But Mew's significance extends beyond mere genetics. In the lore of the Pokémon world, Mew possesses an unusual trait. It can learn any technical machine or move tutor move in the games. This isn't just a gameplay mechanic. It reflects the Pokémon's status as the ancestral template. If all Pokémon derive from Mew, then it makes sense that Mew would retain the potential to use techniques that its descendants developed. It's a living library of Pokémon potential, a being that embodies possibility itself. The discovery of Mew transformed scientific understanding of Pokémon evolution, but it also raised profound questions. If Mew was the ancestor of all Pokémon, where did Mew itself come from? How did it come to possess such remarkable genetic diversity? And perhaps most troubling, what would happen if someone tried to harness that genetic potential for their own purposes? These questions led to one of the darkest chapters in Kanto's history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition. But before we delve into that story, we need to talk about the three beings that dominate Kanto's skies and shape its very weather patterns. The legendary birds of Kanto are Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, and each one commands an elemental force with such mastery that they've shaped entire ecosystems around their presence. These aren't Pokémon that happen to be ice, electric, and fire type respectively. They are ice, electricity, and fire made manifest, living embodiments of these elemental forces. Articuno, the freeze Pokémon, makes its home in the coldest, most inhospitable places in Kanto. The Seafoam Islands, where ice has permanently claimed caves and grottos, where the temperature never rises above freezing, where even the strongest fire-type attacks seem to lose their potency in the face of Articuno's dominion. This elegant bird, with its long, streaming tail and crystalline wings, doesn't just control ice, it creates it from the moisture in the air itself. When Articuno flies, it leaves trails of frost in its wake. When it appears, blizzards form. The very air around it crystallizes. Legends say that Articuno appears to lost travelers in snowstorms, though whether it guides them to safety or lures them deeper into the cold depends on which version of the tale you hear. What's certain is that seeing Articuno is considered a rare blessing or an omen, depending on the circumstances. Its presence means the weather is about to turn dangerously cold, but it also indicates that the natural order is being maintained, that winter will continue its cycle, that ice will endure. Zapdos, the electric Pokémon, represents a different kind of power. Where Articuno's might is quiet, cold, almost serene, Zapdos embodies raw, crackling violence. This spiky golden bird makes its home in places where electricity naturally concentrates, particularly the abandoned power plant in Kanto, a fitting domain for a creature that seems to be made of lightning itself. Every beat of its wings generates electrical discharge. Every cry sends thunder rolling across the sky. According to Kanto legends, Zapdos appears during thunderstorms, emerging from dark clouds with eyes that flash like strobe lights and feathers that spark with constant current. In ancient times, people believed that Zapdos caused thunderstorms, that its very presence agitated the atmosphere into producing lightning. Modern science suggests a more complex relationship. Zapdos seems drawn to electrical storms, feeding on their energy, perhaps even guiding the flow of electricity through its own body to prevent more destructive outcomes. Whatever the truth, encountering Zapdos is said to be simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. The air becomes charged with so much electricity that hair stands on end, Metal objects spark and sizzle, and the smell of ozone becomes overwhelming. And then, through the storm, those electric eyes appear, and you realize you're in the presence of something far beyond a normal Pokémon. And then there's Moltres, the flame Pokémon, whose very existence seems to defy logic. This massive bird burns with an eternal fire, its entire body wreathed in flames that never extinguish, never diminish, never require fuel. When Moltres spreads its wings, it looks like the sun itself has taken avian form, a being of pure, incandescent heat that can melt stone with its presence and ignite forests with a careless flap of its wings. Moltres makes its home in volcanic areas, particularly Victory Road and the volcano on Cinnabar Island, places where the Earth's own fire rises to meet the sky's flame. In ancient times, people believed that Moltres carried embers to villages in need, that it represented the beneficial aspects of fire. Warmth, light, the ability to forge metal and cook food. But they also feared it, knowing that a Moltres in a rage could reduce entire forests to ash, that its power was not something that could be easily controlled or contained. The three legendary birds exist in a delicate balance: ice, electricity, and fire, each powerful, each capable of reshaping the environment, each kept in check by the presence of the others. When all three are in harmony, Kanto's weather patterns remain stable. But disturb that balance, threaten one of the birds, and the entire region's climate can shift dangerously out of alignment. This theme of balance, maintained by powerful legendary Pokémon, would recur throughout the series. But the Kanto birds established it first. They taught us that legendary Pokémon aren't just rare or powerful. They serve ecological and even cosmic purposes. They're necessary. The world needs them. But what happens when humanity tries to create its own legendary Pokémon? What occurs when scientific pride and ambition lead researchers to believe they can improve upon nature, that they can craft something even more powerful than Mew, the ancestor of all Pokémon? The answer is Mewtwo, and its story is one of the most tragic and complex in all of Pokémon lore. The Cinnabar Island lab journal entries, scattered throughout the burned remains of the Pokémon Mansion, tell a story of increasing hubris and growing horror. Scientists, funded by sources that are never entirely clear in the original games, obtained Mew's genetic material and began experiments to create a clone. But not just any clone. They wanted to create an enhanced version, a Pokémon that possessed all of Mew's potential, but with amplified psychic power, greater physical capabilities, and enhanced intelligence. On February 6th, they successfully created a living clone from Mew's DNA. They named it Mewtwo. But the journal entries become increasingly troubled after that date. Mewtwo was too powerful, too intelligent, most troublingly, too aware. Unlike Mew, which possessed a playful, innocent nature, Mewtwo was born into a laboratory, created as an experiment, treated as a weapon. And as it grew and its psychic powers developed, it began to ask questions that its creators couldn't or wouldn't answer. Why was it created? What was its purpose? Was it merely a tool, a weapon to be used by humans? Did it have rights, autonomy, a soul? These weren't idle philosophical musings. Mewtwo's psychic abilities allowed it to sense the thoughts and intentions of those around it, and what it sensed filled it with rage and despair. It had been created for purposes it didn't agree with, brought into existence without consent, and now it was expected to serve. Mewtwo's escape from the laboratory was catastrophic. Using its tremendous psychic power, it destroyed the facility, leaving only burned ruins behind. The journal entries end abruptly, and we're left to imagine the fate of the scientists who created this being. Mewtwo then took up residence in Cerulean Cave, the deepest, most dangerous cave system in Kanto, a place where only the strongest trainers dare venture. The story of Mewtwo raises questions that the Pokémon series continues to grapple with across all generations. What is the ethical responsibility of those who create life? Do created beings have the same rights as naturally occurring ones? Is it moral to create a sentient being for the purpose of serving others? The fact that these questions emerged in what was essentially a children's game speaks to the depth and sophistication of the storytelling, even in those early days. Mewtwo's power is undeniable. With a base stat total of 680, it stands among the strongest non-mega evolved Pokémon in existence. Its psychic-type attacks can devastate entire teams. Its speed and special attack stats make it a terrifying opponent in battle. But more than its power, Mewtwo represents something fundamental about the relationship between humans and Pokémon, about the responsibility that comes with the ability to shape and alter life, about the consequences of playing God. The first Pokémon movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, would expand on this story significantly, giving Mewtwo a voice and a deeper philosophical perspective. In that film, Mewtwo questions not just its own existence, but the very nature of the bond between Pokémon and trainers. Is it partnership or slavery? Cooperation or exploitation? The movie doesn't provide easy answers, and that ambiguity has made Mewtwo one of the most compelling and discussed legendary Pokémon in the entire franchise. But here's something that connects Mewtwo back to Mew in an interesting way. Despite being created to be superior, despite possessing greater raw power, Mewtwo can never quite replicate what makes Mew special. Mew's innocence, its playfulness, its natural integration into the world, these are things that Mewtwo's enhanced abilities can't touch. In a very real sense, Mewtwo's tragedy is that it was created to be better than something perfect, and that impossible standard haunts it. The Kanto legendary Pokémon, then, established several templates that would influence every generation that followed. They introduced the concept of elemental trios, 3 legendary Pokémon that balance each other and maintain natural order. They established that legendary Pokémon could have profound lore implications, without necessarily being central to the main story. And with Mewtwo and Mew, they created a narrative about the ethics of creation, power, and responsibility that the series would return to again and again. But Kanto was just the beginning. The legendary Pokémon introduced here were powerful, yes, but their scope was relatively limited. They influenced Kanto, shaped its weather and ecosystems, raised questions about science and ethics. But they didn't create the fundamental forces of the universe. They didn't shape reality itself. They weren't gods. That would come later. But first, we need to journey to Johto, where an ancient tragedy gave birth to a new legendary trio, where two tower guardians watched over the region from their sacred perches, and where a small, green, time-traveling Pokémon offered hope for a better future. If Kanto taught us that legendary Pokémon were rare and powerful, Johto taught us that they could be woven into the very fabric of a region's culture and history. The legendary Pokémon of Johto aren't just powerful beings that happen to live in the area. They're central to Johto's identity, its mythology, its relationship with tradition and the past. Every town and city in Johto seems touched by legendary presence in some way, whether through ancient stories, sacred sites, or living memories of catastrophe and renewal. Our story begins with two towers that once stood in what is now Ecruteak City, though at the time they were built, the city was young and the towers were its crown jewels. The Brass Tower and the Bell Tower, or as they were sometimes called, the Burned Tower and the Tin Tower, represented the pinnacle of ancient Johto's architectural and spiritual achievement. Both towers reached toward the heavens, symbols of humanity's desire to connect with the divine forces that shaped their world. The Brass Tower was said to be a place of warmth and joy, where people and Pokémon came together in celebration and friendship. The Bell Tower, by contrast, was more solemn, more contemplative, a place of meditation and spiritual reflection. Both were sacred, but in different ways, and each tower had a guardian, a legendary Pokémon of immense power that watched over the people of Johto from their elevated perches. Atop the Bell Tower dwelt Ho-Oh, the rainbow Pokémon, one of the most magnificent legendary Pokémon ever recorded. Standing over 12 feet tall with wings that shimmer with the colors of the rainbow, Ho-Oh is said to possess the power to resurrect the deceased, to grant life where there was none, to transform loss into hope. When Ho-Oh flies, its wings catch the light and scatter it into 7 colors, creating rainbows in its wake. It's a sight so beautiful, so awe-inspiring, that those who witness it are said to be blessed with eternal happiness. Ho-Oh's counterpart, residing near the Whirl Islands but associated with the Brass Tower, was Lugia, the diving Pokémon. Where Ho-Oh represents the sky, the sun, and the overt power of life, Lugia represents the sea, the moon, and the quiet power of balance and restraint. This massive, dragon-like bird possesses psychic and flying abilities that allow it to control the very currents of the ocean and the winds that sweep across them. But Lugia's most remarkable trait isn't its power, it's its wisdom in restraining that power. According to legend, Lugia's wings are so powerful that a single flap can create storms that last 40 days. Because of this, Lugia chooses to live deep beneath the ocean's surface, in the depths of the Whirl Islands, away from the world it could so easily damage. This is a legendary Pokémon that understands the weight of its own abilities and makes the conscious choice to limit its interaction with the world, not out of fear or weakness, but out of compassion and wisdom. The relationship between Ho-Oh and Lugia represents a fundamental balance. Creation and preservation, the power to grant life and the wisdom to protect it, the visible force of the rainbow and the hidden depth of the ocean. When both guardians were in place, when the towers stood intact and the sacred sites were respected, Johto flourished. The relationship between humans and Pokémon reached heights that later generations would look back on with nostalgia and longing. But then, catastrophe struck. The brass tower burned. The circumstances of the fire remain somewhat mysterious even within the lore. Some accounts suggest it was struck by lightning during a terrible storm. Others hint at human negligence or even sabotage. What's certain is that the fire was catastrophic. The brass tower, that symbol of warmth and celebration, became an inferno. And in that inferno, 3 Pokémon perished. The identity of these 3 Pokémon has been a subject of debate among Pokémon researchers for years. Some sources suggest they were already the legendary beasts we know today, simply in different forms. Other accounts indicate they were 3 unnamed, non-legendary Pokémon who happened to be in the tower when the fire struck. The ambiguity adds to the mythic quality of the story, but what matters is what happened next. Ho-Oh, watching from atop the bell tower, witnessed the tragedy unfold. The rainbow Pokémon, known for its power over life itself, couldn't save the tower. It couldn't prevent the deaths. But it could do something else. Using its immense life-giving abilities, Ho-Oh resurrected the 3 Pokémon, but not as they were before. They emerged, transformed, imbued with power that reflected the elements of the disaster that claimed their previous forms. From the flames came Entei, the volcano Pokémon, embodying the raw destructive and purifying power of fire itself. Entei appeared in the form of a massive lion with a face mask that resembles volcanic vents and a back that constantly smokes with internal heat. When Entei roars, volcanoes erupt. When it runs, the very ground trembles with heat. Entei represents the fire that consumed the brass tower, but also the transformative power of that fire, the way destruction can clear the way for new growth. From the lightning that may have started the fire came Raikou, the thunder Pokémon, a massive feline creature wreathed in electricity that crackles across its yellow fur with every movement. Raikou embodies the speed and sudden violence of lightning, the electric charge that splits the sky and illuminates the darkness. When Raikou roars, thunder echoes for miles. When it runs, it moves faster than the eye can follow, leaving only the smell of ozone in its wake. Raikou represents the spark that began the catastrophe, but also the swift judgment and clarifying force of the storm. And from the rain that eventually extinguished the flames came Suicune, the Aurora Pokémon, the most enigmatic of the 3. Suicune takes the form of a graceful, crystalline blue cat with a flowing mane and ribbons that trail behind it as it runs. Where Entei and Raikou embody raw elemental power, Suicune represents purification and renewal. It has the power to purify any water it touches, no matter how polluted. When Suicune appears, it brings clean water and fresh hope. It represents the rain that ended the tragedy, but also the possibility of healing and moving forward. The three legendary beasts, now resurrected and empowered, began to roam Johto. They don't stay in one place. They're constantly moving, traveling across the region, and according to the law, they're testing trainers. Not every trainer, mind you, only those who possess certain qualities. Raikou seeks those with sharp reflexes and decisive minds. Entei looks for passion and courage in the face of adversity. Suicune, the most selective of the three, appears only to those with pure hearts and a deep respect for nature. This selectiveness is key to understanding the beast's role. They aren't just powerful Pokémon created by Ho-Oh's resurrection. They're heralds of the rainbow Pokémon, scouts who identify worthy trainers, those who might one day be deemed fit to encounter Ho-Oh itself. In the games, this is reflected in how encountering and respecting the legendary beasts is often a prerequisite to encountering Ho-Oh. The symbolism here runs deep. Suicune, in particular, became the focus of Pokémon Crystal, and later the remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver. This wasn't arbitrary. Suicune represents the possibility of redemption and purification. The idea that even after tragedy, even after loss, the world can be cleansed and made new again. In a region so focused on tradition and the weight of history, Suicune offers the promise that the past doesn't have to define the future. But the tragedy of the Brass Tower had lasting consequences beyond the creation of the legendary beasts. After the fire, Lugia retreated to the depths near the Whirl Islands, and Ho-Oh disappeared from common sight, appearing only rarely to those it deemed worthy. The two Tower Guardians, whose presence had defined Johto's golden age, withdrew from active participation in the world. The bell tower remained, a monument to what was and a beacon for what might be again. But the era of easy communion between legendary Pokémon and humans had ended. This withdrawal introduced a theme that would become increasingly important in later generations. The idea that legendary Pokémon aren't always accessible, that humanity's actions can drive these powerful beings away, and that regaining their presence requires not just strength or strategy, but virtue and wisdom. The legendary Pokémon of Johto judge humanity and find it sometimes wanting. But not all of Johto's legendary Pokémon are so removed from human interaction. Hidden in the Ilex forest, accessible through complicated means, involving a special item called the GS Ball, dwells Celebi, one of the most unique mythical Pokémon in the entire franchise. Celebi is tiny compared to most legendary Pokémon, only about 2 feet tall, with a green, fairy-like appearance and transparent wings that seem to shimmer with temporal energy. But what Celebi lacks in physical presence, it more than makes up for in its unique ability. Celebi can travel through time. Not just perceive time or manipulate it from a fixed point, but actually travel backward and forward through the time stream at will. This ability makes Celebi immensely important to Pokémon lore. If Celebi can travel through time, it means the creature can witness the past and future, can potentially alter events, can exist in multiple time periods simultaneously. In Pokémon Forever, the movie featuring Celebi, we see how this time-traveling ability can be both a blessing and a curse, how it makes Celebi a target for those who would abuse temporal power, and how it allows Celebi to serve as a guardian of the forest across all time periods. Celebi's connection to forests is also significant. It's called the voice of the forest, and it possesses a deep bond with plant life and natural ecosystems. When Celebi appears in a forest, plants flourish, trees grow stronger, and the entire ecosystem seems to pulse with renewed vitality. This isn't just coincidental. Celebi serves as a time-spanning guardian of nature itself, ensuring that forests remain healthy not just in the present, but across the flow of time. Think about what this means. If a forest is threatened with destruction in the present, Celebi can potentially travel to a time when it was healthy and strong, perhaps bringing that vitality forward. If an ancient tree is dying, Celebi might be able to perceive when it will fall and ensure that its seeds have already been distributed to carry on its legacy. Celebi's time travel abilities make it the ultimate conservationist, a being that can protect nature across temporal dimensions. But Celebi's time travel also raises fascinating questions that the series has never fully answered. Can Celebi change the past, or does it merely witness and preserve what has already occurred? If it can change events, does doing so create alternate timelines, or does it alter the single timeline we all experience? These questions become especially relevant when we consider other time-related legendary Pokémon we'll encounter in later generations, particularly in Sinnoh. The existence of Celebi also suggests something profound about the Pokémon universe. Time itself isn't necessarily fixed or linear. If a Pokémon can travel through it freely, then time must be more like space, a dimension that can be traversed rather than an inexorable forward march. This has massive implications for understanding how legendary Pokémon operate, how they perceive reality, and what existence even means for beings that can move through multiple temporal states. Johto's legendary Pokémon, then, expanded the scope of what these beings could represent. Where Kanto gave us elemental guardians and a tragic artificial creation, Johto gave us resurrection, redemption, judgment, and temporal transcendence. The legendary beasts roam the land as tests of character. Ho-Oh and Lugia represent the heights of what harmony between humans and Pokémon can achieve, and the depths of despair when that harmony is broken. And Celebi suggests that the influence of legendary Pokémon extends not just across space, but across time itself. But we've still only scratched the surface of legendary Pokémon lore. The beings we've encountered so far are powerful, yes, but they're still fundamentally part of the world rather than creators of it. They shape weather, resurrect the fallen, travel through time, but they don't create the fundamental forces that make the universe function. That changes when we travel to Hoenn, where we encounter Pokémon whose conflict literally reshaped the continents, where primal forces of land and sea clashed in battles that threatened to tear the world apart, and where a serpent of the sky descended from the stratosphere to restore balance to a world on the brink of annihilation. The legends of Hoenn are violent. Where other regions tell stories of balance and harmony, of cooperation between humans and legendary Pokémon, Hoenn's ancient myths speak of war. Not a war driven by moral failings or philosophical differences, but a war driven by the most fundamental of all instincts, the drive to expand, to claim territory, to dominate the very environment itself. In the beginning, according to Hoenn's creation myths, there was no balance between land and sea. The world was in flux, the continents still forming, the oceans still claiming and reclaiming territory, according to tidal and geological forces that knew no master. Into this chaotic world came two beings of immense power, two Pokémon whose very nature was tied to the fundamental composition of the planet itself. From the deepest ocean trenches came Kyogre, a massive whale-like Pokémon that embodied the sea itself. Kyogre isn't simply a water-type Pokémon that happens to be very strong. Kyogre is the sea, the primal force of oceanic expansion, the drive of water to cover all surfaces and claim dominion over the planet. When Kyogre awakens, storms form, clouds gather, rain begins to fall, and it doesn't stop. The rain continues day after day as sea levels rise and coastlines retreat, as islands are swallowed and low-lying areas become ocean floor. Kyogre's ability in the games, Drizzle, which causes rain to fall when it enters battle, is a pale shadow of its true power. In the lore, when Kyogre exerts its full might, it can create rainstorms that last for months, that raise sea levels by dozens of meters, that transform entire regions into waterlogged wastelands where only aquatic Pokémon can survive. This isn't malice on Kyogre's part. It's simply following its nature, expanding its domain as any living force would do. But opposing this oceanic expansion was an equally powerful force. From the magma chambers beneath the Earth's crust came Groudon, a massive dinosaur-like Pokémon that embodied the land itself. If Kyogre is the drive of water to spread and cover, Groudon is the drive of land to expand and rise. When Groudon awakens, volcanic activity increases. Magma wells up from beneath the crust. New land forms, islands rise from the sea, and the very continents expand as if the Earth itself is growing. Groudon's ability, Drought, which causes harsh sunlight in battle, again represents only a fraction of its true power. According to the myths, when Groudon exerts its full strength, it can evaporate entire seas, can create heat waves so intense that rain evaporates before it hits the ground, can expand continents to the point where oceans become mere lakes trapped between massive land masses. Like Kyogre, this isn't driven by malice or hatred. It's simply Groudon's nature to expand the domain of land. These two forces, expansion of sea and expansion of land, are fundamentally incompatible. There's no compromise position where both can achieve their full potential. If Kyogre succeeds in covering the world with ocean, there's no land left for Groudon. If Groudon succeeds in evaporating the seas and expanding the continents to cover the globe, there's no ocean left for Kyogre. They are locked in an eternal conflict. And that conflict shaped the very geography of the Pokémon world. The ancient peoples of Hoenn witnessed this conflict and recorded it in their myths and legends. They spoke of battles that shook the foundations of the world, of tidal waves hundreds of feet high crashing against mountains that rose from the ocean floor, of steam filling the air until visibility dropped to nothing, of the entire region becoming a battleground between these primordial forces. And here's what makes this so terrifying. Both Kyogre and Groudon are mindless in their conflict. They're not driven by strategy or tactics. They're not fighting because of some ancient grudge or philosophical difference. They're simply following their natures, and those natures demand that they expand their domains without limit. They can't stop. They can't compromise. They can't even really understand that their conflict is threatening to destroy the very world they're fighting over. The ancient myths tell us that this conflict continued for ages, with neither side able to gain a permanent advantage. Kyogre would push Groudon back, flooding vast areas, only for Groudon to surge forward later, creating new landmasses and evaporating the encroaching seas. The world existed in a state of constant catastrophic flux, and the Pokémon and people trying to live in it suffered immensely. But then something descended from above, something that had been watching the conflict from the upper atmosphere, from the ozone layer that surrounds the planet, something that finally decided that enough was enough. Rayquaza, the sky-high Pokémon, is one of the most impressive legendary Pokémon in terms of sheer physical presence. This serpentine dragon stretches over 23 feet long, its green and yellow body covered in intricate patterns that seem to shimmer with atmospheric energy. Rayquaza doesn't live on the ground or in the sea. It lives in the ozone layer, the stratospheric region where the Earth's atmosphere protects the surface from harmful radiation. From this elevated position, Rayquaza watches over the planet, serving as a guardian that intervenes only when the world itself is threatened. When Kyogre and Groudon's conflict reached a critical point, when it became clear that their battle would render the world uninhabitable, Rayquaza descended. The myths describe its arrival as a green meteor, a streak of emerald light that split the sky and descended between the two warring titans. And Rayquaza possessed something that neither Kyogre nor Groudon had: the ability to halt their expansion drives. The mechanism by which Rayquaza accomplished this varies depending on which version of the myth you consult. Some say Rayquaza used its mastery of atmospheric energy to create conditions where neither land nor sea could expand. Others suggest that Rayquaza's presence simply overawed the other two, that a being of the sky naturally commands respect from beings of land and sea. The most interesting interpretation, and the one supported by the game's Mega Evolution mechanics, is that Rayquaza consumed meteorites to gain power, using energy from space itself to match and exceed the earthbound power of Kyogre and Groudon. Whatever the mechanism, the result was clear. Rayquaza forced Kyogre and Groudon to stand down. The two primordial titans retreated to deep slumber, Kyogre to the depths of the ocean, Groudon to magma chambers far beneath the surface. And Rayquaza returned to the stratosphere, watching and waiting, ready to descend again if the balance was ever threatened. This conflict and its resolution established Hoenn's geography. The region's mix of islands, peninsulas, and connected landmasses reflects the push and pull between oceanic and continental forces. The active volcanic activity on Mount Chimney represents Groudon's lingering influence. The powerful ocean currents and frequent rain around areas like Sutopolis City reflect Kyogre's enduring power. And the clear skies above, when weather conditions are normal, represent Rayquaza's maintenance of balance. But here's what makes the weather trio so significant. They represent the first time in the series that legendary Pokémon were directly responsible for shaping the physical world on a massive scale. The legendary birds of Kanto influence weather patterns. Ho-Oh and Lugia represent spiritual and cultural forces. But Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza literally created the continents and oceans. They are geographic forces made flesh, and their power operates on a planetary scale. This established a new template for legendary Pokémon. World shapers, beings whose conflicts and actions don't just affect a region, but can threaten global catastrophe. It also introduced the concept of a legendary Pokémon that serves as a mediator or peacekeeper, a role that Rayquaza fulfills. This theme of a third, balancing force would recur in later generations, particularly with Zygarde in Kalos. The weather trio also introduced something else that would become increasingly important: the concept of primal reversion. In Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Kyogre and Groudon can undergo primal reversion, temporarily accessing their ancient, more powerful forms from the age when they battled for dominance. Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon are even more devastating than their modern counterparts, suggesting that the versions we encounter in the present are diminished, restrained versions of what they once were. This raises fascinating questions. Did Rayquaza actually defeat Kyogre and Groudon, or did it merely convince them to restrain themselves? Are they constantly maintaining a suppressed state, holding back their full power to avoid reigniting the ancient conflict? And if they did return to their primal forms and resume their battle, would Rayquaza be strong enough to stop them again? These questions gained added significance with the introduction of Mega Evolution in Generation 6. Rayquaza is the only legendary Pokémon that can Mega Evolve without requiring a Mega Stone, instead transforming through the ancient power it gained from consuming meteorites. Mega Rayquaza is one of the most powerful Pokémon in existence, with stats that exceed even Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon, suggesting that yes, if the weather trio's conflict resumed, Rayquaza could still fulfill its role as peacekeeper. But Hoenn's legendary roster doesn't end with the weather trio. The region is also home to several other significant legendary and mythical Pokémon, each adding new dimensions to the region's mythology. Hidden in ruins scattered across Hoenn are three ancient Pokémon known collectively as the Legendary Giants, or the Regi Trio: Regirock, Regite, and Registeel. These three beings are unlike most other legendary Pokémon. They don't appear to be alive in the traditional sense. They're more like golems or constructs, artificial beings created for a specific purpose by an even more ancient power. Regirock appears to be composed entirely of rocks and boulders from different geological strata, held together by some unknown force. When damaged, it can repair itself by seeking out new rocks to add to its body. The patterns on its face resemble ancient writing, or perhaps primitive computer code, dots arranged in specific configurations that suggest intelligence but not consciousness in the way we normally understand it. Regis is formed from ice that originated during the Ice Age, ice so cold that it cannot melt even when exposed to magma. Like Regirock, its face displays a pattern that resembles ancient writing, and it moves with a mechanical precision that suggests programming rather than thought. The air around Regis drops to -328 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze anything that approaches it instantly. Registeel has a body composed of a metal that doesn't exist anywhere else in the Pokémon world. A substance that's harder than any known metal, yet somehow flexible enough for Registeel to move. This metal is completely hollow, and no one knows what, if anything, exists inside Registeel's body. Like its counterparts, Registeel bears the mysterious dot pattern on its face. The Regi Trio were sealed away in ancient times, locked in remote ruins accessible only through specific puzzles that required knowledge of Braille, the writing system for the blind. This choice carries significance beyond simple game mechanics. Braille is a system that represents language through touch rather than sight, suggesting that the ancient people who sealed the Regis were attempting to preserve knowledge in a form that would survive even if visual records were destroyed. But who created the Regi Trio? Why were they sealed away? The answer came in Generation 4 with the introduction of Regigigas, the colossal Pokémon. This massive being, standing over 12 feet tall and weighing nearly 1,000 pounds, is credited in Sinnoh mythology with creating Regirock, Regix, and Registeel from rock, ice, and magma, respectively. More significantly, legend states that Regigigas towed the continents into their current positions, using ropes. This means that Regigigas is another world shaper, a being whose actions literally determined the layout of the planet's landmasses. But unlike Kyogre and Groudon, whose shaping was violent and conflict-driven, Regigigas seems to have deliberately arranged the continents, suggesting purpose and intelligence behind the act. Did Regigigas arrange the continents to create optimal living conditions? To separate warring factions? To fulfill some design we can't comprehend? The games never tell us. What we do know is that Regigigas created the Regi Trio to serve as guardians, or perhaps as assistants in its continental arrangement. The three Regis represent the fundamental materials of the Earth: rock, ice, and metal. By creating beings from these materials and granting them some form of life or animation, Regigigas demonstrated power over the very composition of the planet. Later generations would add to the Regi family. Generation 8 introduced Regieleki and Regidrago, legendary Pokémon created by Regigigas from pure electrical energy and crystallized dragon energy respectively. These additions suggest that Regigigas's creative ability extends beyond physical materials to energy itself, further establishing its status as one of the most powerful legendary Pokémon in existence. Hoenn also introduced a pair of legendary Pokémon that would become fan favorites, Latias and Latios, the Eon Pokémon. These dragon and psychic-type siblings represent a different aspect of legendary Pokémon. Not world shapers or primordial forces, but highly intelligent, empathic beings that choose to interact with humans in specific, limited ways. Latias and Latios possess the ability to sense the emotions and thoughts of humans and other Pokémon. They can also disguise themselves using light refraction, making themselves appear human when they want to move through cities unnoticed. These abilities make them unique among legendary Pokémon. They're powerful enough to be classified as legendary, but intelligent and empathic enough to understand and even sympathize with human society. The Eon Pokémon are also fiercely protective of their home city, Alto Mare, which appears in Pokémon Heroes, Latios and Latias. The movie establishes that Latios and Latias have served as guardians of the city for generations, protecting it from those who would abuse the power of the Soul Dew, a mystical item connected to the siblings' parents. This introduces another theme: legendary Pokémon that serve as localized guardians, protectors of specific places, rather than maintainers of worldwide balance. Then there's Jirachi, the Wish Pokémon, a mythical Pokémon that sleeps for 1,000 years at a time, awakening for only 7 days when a comet appears in the night sky. During those 7 days, Jirachi can grant wishes written on the tags attached to its head. This is an enormously powerful ability, and it's deliberately limited by Jirachi's sleep cycle, preventing the wish-granting power from being abused. Jirachi represents another common theme in mythical Pokémon: enormous power that's carefully constrained or limited. Celebi can travel through time but remains tied to forests. Jirachi can grant wishes, but only for 7 days every 1,000 years. Mew possesses the DNA of all Pokémon, but is incredibly rare and elusive. These limitations prevent mythical Pokémon from becoming Deus Ex Machina, all-powerful beings that could solve any problem. They're powerful, yes, but that power comes with significant restrictions. Finally, there's Deoxys, perhaps the most unusual legendary Pokémon in the entire franchise. Deoxys is not native to the Pokémon world. It originated as a space virus that was exposed to a laser beam during atmospheric re-entry. The combination of extraterrestrial origin and human-generated energy mutated the virus into a conscious, intelligent being with incredible psychic powers and the unique ability to shift between 4 different forms: normal, attack, defense, and speed. Deoxys's existence raises profound questions about the nature of life in the Pokémon universe. If a space virus can become a powerful, intelligent Pokémon, what does that say about the origins of other Pokémon? Could other species have extraterrestrial origins? Is the genetic code that Mew possesses actually native to the Pokémon world? Or could it too have originated elsewhere in the universe? Deoxys also connects to Rayquaza in interesting ways. In the movie Destiny Deoxys, and in the Delta episode of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Rayquaza treats Deoxys as a threat, an invader that must be driven away or destroyed. This makes sense. Rayquaza guards the ozone layer and the planet below it. From Rayquaza's perspective, Deoxys is an alien contaminant, a being that doesn't belong, and whose presence could disrupt the balance Rayquaza works to maintain. The legendary Pokémon of Hoenn, then, expanded the scope of the mythology enormously. We moved from regional guardians and elemental forces to beings that shaped continents, from spiritual symbols to extraterrestrial invaders. Hoenn established that legendary Pokémon could operate on a planetary scale, that their conflicts could threaten the entire world, and that resolving those conflicts required beings of even greater power to intervene. But even Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza, for all their world-shaping power, didn't create the world itself. They shaped what already existed, arranged and rearranged the materials of a planet that was already there. The question of true creation, of where the Pokémon world came from in the first place, wouldn't be addressed until Generation 4. In Sinnoh, we would encounter legendary Pokémon that didn't just shape the world. They created it. They established the fundamental forces that make reality possible. They wove the very fabric of space, time, and antimatter. And at the center of it all stood a being that predated existence itself, a Pokémon that was worshipped as nothing less than God. If every previous generation had been building towards something, expanding the scope and scale of what legendary Pokémon could represent, then Generation 4 was the culmination. Sinnoh didn't just add more powerful legendary Pokémon to the roster. It tackled the fundamental questions of cosmology itself. Where did the universe come from? What forces govern reality? Is there a supreme being? And if so, what is its nature? These aren't questions you'd expect to find in a game primarily marketed to children, yet there they are, woven throughout the mythology of Sinnoh. And the answers the games provide are simultaneously profound and deliberately ambiguous, creating a creation myth that rivals real-world religious cosmologies in its scope and complexity. Before we delve into the specifics, we need to understand something about Sinnoh's approach to mythology. Unlike previous regions, which presented their legendary Pokémon through direct encounters and straightforward narratives, Sinnoh buries much of its most important lore in books, library texts, and fragments of ancient myths scattered throughout the region. The games assume that players interested in deep lore will seek it out, while those who just want the basic story can proceed without engaging with the more complex cosmological questions. This approach means that many players completed Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum without fully appreciating the mind-bending implications of what they were encountering. They caught Dialga or Palkia, defeated or captured Giratina, maybe even obtained Arceus through event distribution, without truly understanding that they were literally capturing the beings responsible for creating time, space, and the material universe itself. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of Sinnoh, but the beginning of everything. According to the ancient myths preserved in Sinnoh's Kanalav library, in the beginning there was only churning chaos. From this primordial void, at the place where all things became one, an egg appeared. From this egg emerged what ancient texts call the Original One, a being the people of ancient Hisui would come to worship as Almighty Sinnoh, though we now know it by the name Arceus. Arceus, the alpha Pokémon, is described in mythology as having shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms, though the being we encounter appears to have only 4 legs and no visible arms. This suggests the 1,000 arms reference could be metaphorical, perhaps inspired by depictions of multi-armed deities from various world religions. Or it might indicate that what we see is merely an avatar of something far greater. Pokémon Legends, Arceus would later confirm this interpretation, revealing that the Arceus trainer's encounter is indeed an avatar, a physical manifestation of a much larger consciousness that exists beyond normal space and time. What we do know is that Arceus possesses the normal type classification, which seems almost comically inadequate for a being of such cosmic significance. But the choice is deliberate. Normal type represents the default state, the baseline from which all other types derive. Arceus is not fire or water or psychic. It is existence itself, before existence became divided into different attributes and properties. Arceus's signature ability, multi-type, allows it to change its type based on the plate or Z-crystal it holds. There are 18 plates corresponding to the 18 Pokémon types, and ancient Sinnoh texts suggest that these plates are fragments of Arceus's original power, pieces of itself that it dispersed throughout the world. This raises fascinating theological questions. Did Arceus deliberately fragment its own power? Was it necessary to limit itself to create a universe that could sustain other life? Or are the plates something else entirely, perhaps tools or focuses that Arceus created to help it shape reality? But Arceus didn't create the universe directly. Instead, it created 3 beings to handle specific aspects of reality, 3 legendary Pokémon that would come to be known as the Creation Trio. First came Dialga, the temporal Pokémon, a massive steel and dragon-type being that embodies time itself. Dialga doesn't just control time or manipulate it. Dialga is time. When Dialga's heart beats, time flows forward. If Dialga were to stop existing, time itself would cease, the entire universe frozen in a single eternal moment. Dialga possesses the power to move forward and backward through time at will, to slow time's passage or accelerate it, to create temporal anomalies and time loops. Its roar can distort the flow of time for miles around. The concept of a Pokémon that literally is time rather than simply controlling it represents a significant escalation in the scope of legendary Pokémon. Dialga isn't a guardian of time or a being with temporal powers. It's the fundamental force that makes change, progression, and causality possible. Without Dialga, there is no before and after, no cause and effect, no aging or growth or decay. There is only the eternal now, unchanging and unchangeable. Simultaneously with Dialga, Arceus created Palkia, the spatial Pokémon, where Dialga embodies time, Palkia embodies space itself. This water and dragon-type Pokémon doesn't just move through space or manipulate distances. Palkia is space, the three-dimensional framework that allows objects to have position and extension. Palkia can create space, destroy it, warp it, fold it, or stretch it. It can make distant locations adjacent or separate nearby points by impossible distances. When Palkia breathes, the very fabric of space ripples with its power. Together, Dialga and Palkia created what we understand as the space-time continuum, the four-dimensional framework within which all events occur and all objects exist. But there's a problem inherent in this creation. Dialga and Palkia are fundamentally opposed. Time wants to flow forward, carrying everything along its current. Space wants to expand, stretching the distance between all points. When time flows too fast, it can tear space apart. When space expands too rapidly, it can stretch time to the breaking point. This potential conflict required a solution, and Arceus provided one by creating a third member of the creation trio, Giratina, the renegade Pokémon. Giratina is perhaps the most fascinating and complex member of the trio, a ghost and dragon-type being that embodies antimatter and the distortion of reality. Where Dialga and Palkia exist in the normal universe, Giratina was banished to, or perhaps chose to inhabit, the distortion world, a mirror realm where the normal laws of physics don't apply. The distortion world is one of the most visually striking and conceptually interesting locations in any Pokémon game. Gravity operates in multiple directions simultaneously. Waterfalls flow upward. Platforms exist at impossible angles. Time and space behave erratically, sometimes flowing backward, sometimes folding in on themselves. It's a realm of pure chaos and distortion, and Giratina is its master, and possibly its creator. But Giratina isn't simply a force of chaos. It serves a crucial purpose in the cosmic balance. It regulates the interaction between Dialga and Palkia. When the two begin to clash, when their fundamental opposition threatens to tear reality apart, Giratina emerges from the distortion world to forcibly separate them or absorb the excess energy their conflict creates. In this way, Giratina serves as a pressure valve, a being that prevents the normal universe from destroying itself through its own internal contradictions. The relationship between the creation trio mirrors concepts found in real-world physics and cosmology. Dialga represents time, one of the four dimensions of space-time as understood by modern physics. Palkia represents the three spatial dimensions. Giratina's association with antimatter and distortion is particularly intriguing from a scientific perspective. Antimatter is the mirror opposite of normal matter that annihilates regular matter on contact, but is theorized to be necessary for the universe's existence according to quantum physics. Whether the game developers intentionally drew these parallels or they emerged organically from the creative process, the alignment is striking and adds depth to Sinnoh's creation mythology. But Arceus didn't stop with creating the fundamental forces of reality. It also created beings to add content to that reality, to fill the void of space-time with actual life and meaning. These beings are known as the Lake Guardians, or the Lake Trio, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. These three small, pixie-like Pokémon represent the cognitive and emotional capacities that makes sapient life possible. They're not as physically imposing as the creation trio, and their power operates on a different scale. But they're arguably just as important to the existence of intelligent life in the Pokémon universe. Uxie, the knowledge Pokémon, embodies knowledge itself and is said to have granted humans and Pokémon the ability to learn, remember, and accumulate wisdom. According to legend, merely looking into Uxie's eyes will cause a person to lose their memories, a defense mechanism that protects the immense knowledge Uxie contains. Uxie dwells in Lake Acuity, and its influence allows all beings in the Pokémon universe to gain knowledge through experience and study. Mesprit, the emotion Pokémon, embodies the full spectrum of feelings and emotions. It taught humans and Pokémon how to feel joy, sorrow, anger, love, and all the complex emotions that make life meaningful. Mesprit resides in Lake Verity, and according to legend, it can drain or grant emotions, making it one of the most potentially dangerous of the Lake Guardians despite its small size and benign appearance. A world without Mesprit would be one of emotionless automatons, beings that exist but cannot feel their existence. Azelf, the willpower Pokémon, embodies determination, motivation, and the drive to act on one's knowledge and emotions. Without Azelf, beings would have knowledge and feelings, but no will to act on them, no determination to pursue goals or overcome obstacles. Azelf makes its home in Lake Valor, and it's said that if Azelf is harmed or restrained, all living beings will lose their willpower and become immobile. Azelf represents the crucial link between knowing, feeling, and doing. Together, the Lake Guardians complete the creation of sapient life. The creation trio provided the framework of reality, space, time, and a pressure valve to keep them from destroying each other. The Lake Guardians filled that framework with beings capable of knowledge, emotion, and will, the three components necessary for consciousness and intelligent life. This is a remarkably sophisticated creation myth, suggesting that intelligence requires not just a physical substrate, but specific cognitive and emotional capabilities working in harmony. The relationship between Arceus, the creation trio, and the Lake Guardians forms a hierarchy of cosmic power that influences all later legendary Pokémon. Arceus stands alone at the top, the alpha Pokémon that predates and transcends all others. Below it are Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, beings that shape the fundamental nature of reality. Below them are the Lake Guardians, beings that fill reality with conscious, feeling, motivated life. And below all of them are the other legendary Pokémon, powerful but operating within the framework that Arceus and its creations established. But Sinnoh's legendary roster doesn't end with the creation trio and Lake Guardians. The region is also home to several other significant legendary and mythical Pokémon, each adding new dimensions to our understanding of how the Pokémon world operates. Heatran is a fire and steel-type legendary Pokémon that dwells in volcanic caverns, particularly Stark Mountain. Unlike most legendary Pokémon, Heatran can be either male or female, making it unique among legendaries until recent generations. Heatran's body generates intense heat, allowing it to survive in magma chambers and even swim through molten rock. While not as cosmologically significant as the creation trio, Heatran represents an important ecological niche, a being that can survive in environments that would instantly kill most other life forms. Regigigas, which we mentioned briefly in the Hoenn section, appears in Sinnoh and plays a significant role in the region's deeper lore. The Snowpoint Temple, where Regigigas sleeps, contains ancient texts, suggesting that Regigigas shaped the continents after Arceus created the world, arranging landmasses to create optimal conditions for life. This makes Regigigas a world shaper like Kyogre and Groudon, but unlike them, Regigigas acted with purpose and intelligence rather than blind instinct. Then there are Cresselia and Darkrai, two mythical Pokémon that represent opposing aspects of sleep and dreams. Cresselia, the lunar Pokémon, embodies pleasant dreams and restful sleep. Its presence can cure nightmares and help those suffering from sleep disorders. Cresselia's body glows with a soft, healing light, and the veil-like growths on its sides shimmer with lunar energy. It represents the beneficial, restorative aspects of sleep. Darkrai, in contrast, is the pitch-black Pokémon that embodies nightmares. Darkrai's signature move, Dark Void, puts opponents to sleep and causes them to have terrible nightmares. According to the lore, Darkrai doesn't inflict nightmares out of malice. It happens involuntarily, a byproduct of Darkrai's very existence. This has led Darkrai to isolate itself from humans and other Pokémon, choosing loneliness over accidentally causing suffering. It's a tragic figure, a being whose nature forces it into solitude despite not being inherently evil. The relationship between Cresselia and Darkrai reflects the dual nature of sleep and dreams. Both are necessary. Pleasant dreams provide rest and restoration, but nightmares serve a purpose too, processing fears and anxieties in a safe environment. A world with only Cresselia would lack the psychological processing that nightmares provide. A world with only Darkrai would make sleep terrifying rather than restful. Both exist in balance, though they're rarely found in the same location. Shaymin is a mythical Pokémon with two forms, land form, and sky form. In its land form, Shaymin appears as a small, hedgehog-like Pokémon covered in grass and flowers. It has the unique ability to cleanse pollutants from air and water, transforming toxic environments into pristine meadows. Shaymin represents nature's resilience, the ability of life to reclaim and purify even heavily damaged ecosystems. When Shaymin is exposed to Grassidea flowers during the day, it transforms into its sky form, gaining the ability to fly. This transformation represents the spreading of purity and restoration across larger areas, allowing Shaymin to travel and cleanse environments that would be inaccessible in its land form. The Grassidea flower requirement suggests that Shaymin's power is linked to healthy ecosystems. It can only access its full potential when surrounded by thriving plant life. Manaphy and Phione are water-type mythical Pokémon with an unusual relationship. Manaphy, the seafaring Pokémon, is said to be born in cold seawater and has the unique ability called Heart Swap, which temporarily exchanges the stat changes of two targets. More significantly in the lore, Manaphy can bond with any Pokémon or human, creating deep emotional connections regardless of species. It represents the universal capacity for empathy and connection. Phione is created when Manaphy breeds with Ditto in the games, making it the only legendary or mythical Pokémon that can be bred, albeit in a limited way. Phione always produces more Phione when bred. It never produces Manaphy. This has led to debates about whether Phione should be classified as mythical or simply as a rare Pokémon. The ambiguity is intentional, blurring the line between mundane and mythical in ways that challenge our understanding of these categories. Finally, there's Arceus itself, obtainable only through special events in the original games. When you obtain Arceus and bring it to the ruins of Alph or Sinjo ruins, something remarkable occurs. Arceus creates a new Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina in front of you, emerging from an egg in a matter of moments. This demonstrates Arceus's creative power directly, showing that it can still produce members of the creation trio on demand. This scene also raises theological questions that the games never fully address. If Arceus can create new versions of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, does that mean there could be multiple versions of these beings? Are the ones we encounter throughout the games the originals, or are they later iterations? Could there be alternate timelines or universes with their own creation trios? The games introduce these possibilities without resolving them, leaving players to draw their own conclusions. The legendary Pokémon of Sinnoh represent the culmination of the series' mythology up to Generation 4. They provided a complete creation myth, explaining not just how the world came to be, but why it operates according to the physical and psychological laws we observe. They established a clear hierarchy of cosmic power and gave us beings that operate on scales ranging from universal creation down to individual emotional states. But after Sinnoh, the series faced a challenge. Where do you go after you've introduced God? How do you create new legendary Pokémon that feel significant when the previous generation gave us the literal creators of space, time, and reality? Generation 5's answer was elegant. Instead of going bigger, go deeper. Instead of focusing on cosmic creation, focus on how legendary Pokémon interact with human civilization, how they reflect our ideals and values, how they shape not the physical world, but the cultural and ideological landscape. In Unova, legendary Pokémon would become intertwined with human history in ways we hadn't seen before, representing not elemental forces or cosmic powers, but ideals, justice, and the complex relationship between truth and ideology. Unova represented a fresh start for the Pokémon franchise. Based on the United States rather than regions of Japan, featuring an entirely new regional Pokédex with no Pokémon from previous generations, available until after the main story, Unova was designed to recapture the sense of discovery and newness that Generation 1 had provided. And nowhere was this fresh approach more evident than in how it handled legendary Pokémon. Where Sinnoh's legends were cosmic and abstract, dealing with creation and the fundamental forces of reality, Unova's legends were intimate and ideological, focusing on how legendary Pokémon interact with human society and how they reflect human values and beliefs. The central legendary Pokémon of Unova don't shape continents or create dimensions. Instead, they embody concepts like truth, ideals, and the eternal tension between them. At the heart of Unova's mythology stands a single dragon, the original dragon, a being of immense power that worked alongside a pair of twin heroes to found the Unova region. These twin heroes were said to be inseparable, united in their vision for how humans and Pokémon should coexist. Together with the original dragon, they created a prosperous civilization where both species thrived. But then came a philosophical split. The twin heroes began to disagree about fundamental questions. What matters more, truth or ideals? Should society be built on accepting reality as it is, or on pursuing idealistic visions of what it could become? These weren't trivial differences of opinion. They were fundamental philosophical incompatibilities, worldviews that couldn't be reconciled through compromise or discussion. The conflict between the heroes grew so intense that the original dragon itself split in two, creating Reshiram and Zekrom, each embodying one side of the philosophical divide. Reshiram, the vast white Pokémon, embodies truth and reality. This massive white dragon with blue eyes and an elegant flame-wreathed body represents the philosophy that society should be built on accepting and working with reality as it exists. Truth cannot be bent or altered to suit our desires. Facts must be acknowledged even when inconvenient. Reshiram's flames can incinerate falsehoods, burning away deception to reveal the truth beneath. It seeks out trainers who value honesty, who prefer harsh truths over comforting lies, who believe that facing reality directly is the path to wisdom. Zekrom, the deep black Pokémon, embodies ideals and the vision of what could be. This massive black dragon with red eyes and electricity crackling across its body represents the philosophy that society should pursue higher ideals even when reality seems to contradict them. ideals give life meaning and direction. They inspire us to transform reality rather than merely accept it. Zekrom generates enough electricity to power entire cities, symbolizing the energy that idealism provides to drive change. It seeks out trainers who dare to envision better worlds, who value aspiration over resignation, who believe that reality can and should be transformed to match our highest ideals. The philosophical conflict between Reshiram and Zekrom is sophisticated for a Pokémon game, especially considering the target audience. Truth versus ideals isn't a simple good versus evil dichotomy. Both perspectives have merit. A society built purely on truth without ideals would be pragmatic but soulless, accepting every injustice and inequality as simply the way things are. A society built purely on ideals without grounding in truth would be inspiring but ultimately dysfunctional, attempting to implement visions that have no basis in reality. The games don't declare either dragon correct. In Black, the player sides with Reshiram while the antagonist pursues Zekrom. In White, these alignments reverse. Both dragons are presented as equally valid, equally powerful, equally worthy of respect. The implication is that the healthiest society needs both truth and ideals, reality testing and aspiration, working in tension but also in balance. But the story of the original dragon doesn't end with Reshiram and Zekrom. According to ancient texts scattered throughout Unova, when the original dragon split, not all of its power went into the two resulting dragons. A third remnant remained, a being composed of the original dragon's husk or corpse, containing the potential to reunite Reshiram and Zekrom, but lacking the will or energy to do so on its own. This is Kyurem, the boundary Pokémon, and it's one of the most tragic legendary Pokémon in the franchise. Kyurem is an ice and dragon type that appears damaged, incomplete, with chunks of its body seemingly frozen or missing. It's tremendously powerful, but that power feels empty, lacking direction or purpose. Kyurem represents the remnant left behind when a unified whole splits apart, the shell that remains when the vital essence departs. In Pokémon Black 2 and White 2, we learn that Kyurem possesses a unique ability. Through the DNA splices, it can fuse with either Reshiram or Zekrom, creating Black Kyurem or White Kyurem, respectively. These fused forms are even more powerful than the individual dragons, and they provide a glimpse of what the original dragon might have been like before the split. But the fusion is incomplete, forced, creating a being that's powerful but still fundamentally broken, still missing a crucial component. This raises fascinating questions that the games never fully answer. Could Kyurem fuse with both Reshiram and Zekrom simultaneously, recreating the original dragon? If so, would that being possess all the memories and personality of the original, or would it be something new? Does the original dragon still exist in some dormant state within Kyurem, waiting for the proper conditions to reunite? Or was it truly destroyed, with Kyurem merely being the empty shell left behind? The Tau Trio, as Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem are collectively known, represents a different approach to legendary Pokémon. They're not forces of nature or cosmic powers. They're philosophical concepts given form, embodiments of the tension between truth and ideals that exists in every society and every individual. Their power is immense, yes, but their significance lies in what they represent rather than what they can physically accomplish. But Unova's legendary roster extends far beyond the Tau Trio. The region introduces several groups of legendary Pokémon, each with their own role in maintaining balance or protecting the innocent. The Swords of Justice are a quartet of Pokémon that protected Pokémon and humans during a great war in Unova's past. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion form the core trio, with Keldeo joining them as an apprentice. These Pokémon don't represent cosmic forces or elemental powers. They represent chivalric virtues, the ideal of using strength to protect the weak and oppose injustice. Cobalion, the Iron Will Pokémon, is the leader of the group. This steel and fighting type Pokémon possesses an aura that calms opponents and allies alike, allowing it to maintain order and direct strategy during conflicts. Cobalion represents discipline, leadership, and the mental strength needed to face overwhelming odds without faltering. Terrakion, the Cavern Pokémon, is a rock and fighting type known for its tremendous physical power. It's said to have charged through castle walls to protect Pokémon during the war, using pure strength to overcome any obstacle. Terrakion represents raw power used in service of justice, the physical might that backs up moral conviction. Virizion, the grassland Pokémon, is a grass and fighting type whose speed and agility are legendary. With horns as sharp as blades, Virizion can move so quickly that opponents cannot track its movements. It represents precision, grace, and the tactical brilliance needed to protect others efficiently without wasting effort or creating collateral damage. Together, these three Swords of Justice fought to protect Pokémon during a devastating war in Unova's history. The nature of this war is never fully explained in the games, but the implications are dark. It was a conflict severe enough that Pokémon needed protection from humans, suggesting that humanity had turned its power against the creatures they usually partnered with. The Swords of Justice opposed this, placing themselves between vulnerable Pokémon and those who would harm them. Keldeo, the Colt Pokémon, is the youngest member of the group. This water and fighting type Pokémon looks up to the original trio as mentors and seeks to prove itself worthy of joining them as an equal. Keldeo's signature move, Secret Sword, creates a blade of water that can cut through any obstacle. When Keldeo fully masters this technique, it transforms into its resolute form, signifying that it has achieved the level of skill and mental focus possessed by its mentors. Keldeo's story introduces an important theme. Legendary Pokémon can grow, learn, and evolve, not in the biological sense, but in terms of skill and character. Keldeo starts as a talented but inexperienced fighter, full of enthusiasm but lacking the discipline and wisdom of the Elder Swords. Through training and experience, it develops into a warrior worthy of standing alongside the others. This suggests that being a legendary Pokémon isn't just about innate power. It's also about character, wisdom, and the proper use of that power. Then there are the forces of nature, a trio that would later become a quartet with the addition of Enamorus in Pokémon Legends, Arceus. These legendary Pokémon represent different aspects of natural phenomena and have shaped the climate and ecology of Unova and surrounding regions. Tornadus, the cyclone Pokémon, is the only pure flying-type legendary Pokémon in existence as of Generation 9. This green, muscular spirit embodies wind and air currents, capable of generating winds strong enough to blow away houses. Tornadus's winds can be creative or destructive. They can scatter seeds and pollinate crops, or they can devastate settlements and destroy forests. It represents the dual nature of wind as both a life-giving and dangerous force. Thundurus, the Bolt-Strike Pokémon, is an electric and flying type that embodies thunderstorms. Where Zapdos from Kanto represents pure electrical power, Thundurus represents the complete storm system: thunder, lightning, rain, and the ozone smell that permeates the air during electrical storms. Thundurus's tail generates endless electrical energy, and according to legend, it fires thunderbolts that set forests ablaze and create widespread destruction. Landorus, the Abundance Pokémon, is a ground and flying type that represents the fertility of Earth. Where Tornadus and Thundurus often bring destruction, Landorus follows behind them, using their destructive power to enrich the soil and promote new growth. Volcanic ash and electrical discharge both add nutrients to soil. Landorus harnesses this, transforming destruction into opportunity. It's worshipped in some parts of Unova as a deity of good harvests. The relationship between these three forces of nature is complex. Tornadus and Thundurus are often at odds, their elemental natures driving them into conflict. When they battle, their clashes create storms that can devastate entire regions. Landorus serves as a mediator, appearing when Tornadus and Thundurus fight to force them apart and restore calm. This echoes the role that Rayquaza plays with Kyogre and Groudon, establishing a pattern where legendary trios often include two opposed forces, and a third that maintains balance between them. Generation 8 would add Enamorus to this group, a fairy and flying type that embodies spring, love, and fertility. Enamorus's inclusion transforms the forces of nature from a trio focused on destructive power and mediation to a quartet that represents the complete cycle of seasons and natural renewal. Enamorus's energy brings warmth after winter, encourages plants to bloom, and inspires Pokémon to seek mates and reproduce. Together with the other forces, it ensures that natural cycles continue in their proper sequence. Each of these forces of nature has two forms: incarnate form and Therian form. The incarnate forms appear humanoid and aggressive, representing untamed natural forces. The Therian forms, accessible through the reveal glass, appear more animalistic and primal, perhaps representing an even older or more fundamental aspect of these beings. This dual-form nature suggests that these Pokémon exist on multiple levels simultaneously, presenting different aspects of themselves depending on circumstances. Unova also introduced several standalone legendary and mythical Pokémon, each significant in its own right. Victini, the Victory Pokémon, is a psychic and fire type that generates limitless energy and shares that energy with those around it. Any trainer or Pokémon that Victini supports is said to be guaranteed victory, though the games never explain whether this is actual fate manipulation or simply an incredible power boost. Victini represents hope, the belief that victory is possible even in seemingly hopeless situations. Meloetta is a normal and psychic-type mythical Pokémon with two forms, Aria form and Pirouette form. In Aria form, Meloetta appears as a feminine figure with a musical note-shaped head, capable of singing melodies that inspire emotion and even control the feelings of those who hear them. When it uses the move Relic Song, it transforms into Pirouette form, becoming normal and fighting type and gaining the ability to express emotion through dance rather than song. Meloetta represents the power of art and music to affect reality, to change moods, and even alter physical states through aesthetic expression. Genesect is perhaps one of the most ethically troubling mythical Pokémon, rivaling Mewtwo in terms of its disturbing origins. Genesect was originally an ancient Pokémon, a bug-type hunter from millions of years ago. Team Plasma, the antagonist organization in Black and White, obtained a Genesect fossil and revived it using advanced technology. But they didn't stop there. They modified it, adding a cannon on its back that can be loaded with different drives to fire different types of energy. They transformed an ancient predator into a modern weapon. This makes Genesect a victim similar to Mewtwo, a being that was brought back or created specifically to serve purposes it didn't choose. Unlike Mewtwo, which had Mew as a template and therefore a sense of what it could have been, Genesect has no clear identity. It's millions of years displaced from its natural time, heavily modified, and unclear whether it's the same being that existed in ancient times or something new created from ancient genetic material. The ethical questions Genesect raises about revival, modification, and consent parallel real-world debates about de-extinction and genetic engineering. The legendary Pokémon of Unova, then, shifted the focus from cosmic creation and elemental forces to philosophical concepts, ethical dilemmas, and the relationship between legendary Pokémon and human civilization. They established that legendary Pokémon could embody ideas and ideals, not just physical forces. They showed us Pokémon that grow and learn, that mediate conflicts, that are modified and weaponized by humans. Unova's legends are more intimate, more ethically complex, and more directly engaged with human society than those of previous generations. But after establishing this framework of philosophical legendary Pokémon, Generation 6 would return to cosmic-scale powers, introducing beings that controlled the fundamental processes of life and death, creation and destruction, in an eternal cycle that maintained the world's balance. Kalos, the Pokémon world's version of France, brought a renewed focus on beauty, elegance, and the aesthetic dimensions of Pokémon. But beneath this surface elegance lay some of the darkest lore in the entire franchise. Stories of ancient wars, weapons of mass destruction, and legendary Pokémon locked in an eternal cycle of giving and taking life. The central legendary Pokémon of Kalos form a trio that represents the most fundamental cycle in existence: life, death, and balance. But unlike previous legendary trios, where the relationship was adversarial or mediated, the Kalos trio exists in a state of dynamic equilibrium, each playing a role that supports and depends on the others. Xerneas, the life Pokémon, is a majestic fairy-type deer whose antlers glow with multicolored light. Xerneas embodies the creative force of life, the energy that allows cells to grow, organisms to reproduce, and ecosystems to flourish. According to legends, when Xerneas's horns shine in 7 colors, it is sharing eternal life with those around it. This doesn't mean literal immortality, but rather a surge of vitality so powerful that those affected are rejuvenated, healed, and filled with energy. Xerneas has 2 forms: active mode, where its antlers glow with vibrant color, and neutral mode, where the glow fades and Xerneas appears as a crystalline tree. This second form represents dormancy, periods when Xerneas rests and accumulates the energy needed for its life-giving activities. According to the lore, Xerneas sleeps for 1,000 years, then awakens to share its accumulated life energy before returning to slumber. This cycle ensures that Xerneas cannot exhaust itself by giving life endlessly. It must rest and recharge. Opposing Xerneas is Yveltal, the destruction Pokémon, a massive dark and flying type bird whose wings spread in a shape reminiscent of the letter Y. Where Xerneas gives life, Yveltal takes it. But this isn't evil or malicious. It's necessary. Yveltal embodies death, the process that ends individual existence but returns energy to the ecosystem, making room for new life to emerge. According to Kalos legends, when Yveltal's life comes to an end, it absorbs the life energy of all living things around it before transforming into a cocoon. This mass absorption of life energy sounds horrific, and it is, but it serves a purpose. It prevents Yveltal's death from creating a void in the natural order. By absorbing life energy as it dies, Yveltal ensures that the cycle can continue, that death itself doesn't die, and leave the world unable to process the transition from living to dead. The relationship between Xerneas and Yveltal isn't one of good versus evil, despite how it might appear on the surface. Xerneas represents birth, growth, and vitality. Yveltal represents death, decay, and the return of energy to the system. Both are necessary. A world with only Xerneas would become overpopulated, choked with life that has nowhere to go, resources stretched beyond sustainability. A world with only Yveltal would quickly become barren, life unable to establish itself before being claimed by death. This is where the third member of the Kalos trio comes in, Zygarde, the Order Pokémon. Zygarde is one of the most complex legendary Pokémon in terms of its forms and function. Unlike most legendary Pokémon, which exist as single entities, Zygarde exists as a collective consciousness, distributed across numerous cells and cores scattered throughout the environment. At its most basic level, Zygarde exists as individual cells and cores. Cells lack consciousness, but serve as sensory organs, allowing Zygarde to monitor the ecosystem from countless vantage points. Cores possess consciousness and can direct the cells. When enough cells and at least one core gather together, they form one of Zygarde's combat-capable forms. Zygarde's 10% form appears as a dog-like creature, fast and aggressive, capable of rapid response to threats but lacking the power to handle major disruptions. Its 50% form, the serpentine dragon most players encounter, possesses significantly more power and can handle most threats to the ecosystem. When two cores combine with enough cells, Zygarde can access complete form, a massive humanoid figure with incredible power that appears only when the threat to the ecosystem is severe enough to warrant maximum response. This modular nature makes Zygarde perfect for its role, monitoring the balance between Xerneas and Yveltal and intervening when that balance tilts too far in either direction. If Xerneas creates too much life, threatening to overwhelm the ecosystem's carrying capacity, Zygarde appears to restrain it. If Yveltal's destruction becomes excessive, threatening to create extinction events, Zygarde intervenes to protect vulnerable species. Zygarde is the ecosystem's immune system, a distributed intelligence that detects threats and responds with appropriate force. The Kalos trio represents a more sophisticated understanding of legendary Pokémon than we've seen before. They're not individual beings with individual desires and conflicts. They're components of a larger system, each playing a role that supports the whole. Xerneas and Yveltal could exist without Zygarde, but their balance would be precarious, vulnerable to external disruptions. Zygarde couldn't exist without Xerneas and Yveltal because there would be no balance to maintain. But Kalos's legends extend beyond the life-death balance trio. The region's mythology is deeply concerned with a catastrophic event in the ancient past, a war so devastating that it shaped modern Kalos society's attitudes toward Pokémon and power. 3,000 years before the events of Pokémon X and Y, Kalos was engulfed in a terrible war. The conflict's causes are never fully explained, but its consequences were clear. Massive casualties among both humans and Pokémon, devastation of the landscape, and the creation of a weapon so powerful that it could end the war, but at a terrible cost. A man whose name has been lost to history, referred to only as AZ, created the ultimate weapon to end the war. This weapon drew on the life force of Pokémon, using their energy to fire a beam capable of unprecedented destruction. AZ used this weapon to end the war, but the cost was staggering. Countless Pokémon died to power the weapon, their life energy drained to fuel humanity's conflict. AZ's beloved Pokémon, Floette, died in the war. Grief-stricken and unable to accept this loss, AZ modified his ultimate weapon, using its power to resurrect Floette. The process worked, but Floette returned to life horrified by what AZ had done, by how many Pokémon had been sacrificed to bring it back. Floette left AZ, unable to stay with someone who had committed such an atrocity, even out of love. This story introduces some of the darkest themes in Pokémon lore. AZ created a weapon powered by Pokémon life force, using the beings humans are supposed to partner with and protect as mere batteries for a weapon of mass destruction. When Floette died, AZ used that same weapon to resurrect it, essentially forcing other Pokémon to die so his partner could live. And Floette, upon returning to life and understanding what AZ had done, chose to leave him, placing moral principle above personal affection. The resurrection process had another consequence. It made both AZ and Floette immortal. For 3,000 years, AZ wandered Kalos, searching for Floette, unable to die, carrying the guilt of his actions. He appears in X and Y as a literally towering figure, over 9 feet tall, aged by millennia of grief and regret. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the abuse of power, about the consequences of treating Pokémon as mere tools, about how love can drive people to commit terrible acts. The ultimate weapon ties into the Kalos legendary Pokémon in a complex way. The weapon drew its power from either Xerneas or Yveltal, depending on which version of the story you're following. It forced these legendary Pokémon to channel their life-giving or death-bringing powers into a destructive beam, perverting their natural roles to serve human warfare. This is one of the few times in the franchise where humans successfully weaponize legendary Pokémon, and the results are portrayed as unequivocally catastrophic. Kalos also introduced 3 mythical Pokémon, each with unique characteristics and lore. Diancie is a rock and fairy type that mutates from Carbink, a common rock and fairy type Pokémon found in caves. This mutation is incredibly rare, occurring perhaps once in several centuries. Diancie possesses the ability to create diamonds instantaneously by compressing carbon in the air. It's considered royalty among Carbink populations, and it can mega evolve into Mega Diancie, one of the most beautiful Pokémon designs in the franchise. Diancie's existence raises interesting questions about the line between legendary, mythical, and ordinary Pokémon. If Diancie is a mutated Carbink, does that mean any Carbink could potentially become Diancie under the right circumstances? Or is there something special about the specific Carbink that become Diancie? The games suggest the latter, but never explicitly confirm it. Hoopa is one of the most powerful mythical Pokémon in terms of its abilities. This psychic and ghost type can create rings that serve as portals to anywhere in the universe, allowing instant travel across any distance. In its confined form, Hoopa is small and mischievous, using its portals to steal food and play pranks. But in its unbound form, accessible through the prison bottle, Hoopa becomes a massive psychic and dark type with enough power to summon legendary Pokémon through its rings. This last ability is particularly significant. Hoopa Unbound can summon other legendary Pokémon, effectively commanding beings of immense power. The movie Hoopa and the Clash of Ages demonstrates this, showing Hoopa summoning multiple legendary Pokémon simultaneously. This makes Hoopa one of the most strategically powerful mythical Pokémon, not because of its own combat abilities, but because it can bring overwhelming force from elsewhere. Volcanion is a fire and water type, the only Pokémon with this unique typing as of Generation 9. This steam-generating Pokémon possesses enough power to blow away entire mountains with the steam it produces. According to legend, Volcanion uses this power to create habitats for Pokémon that have lost their homes, literally reshaping the landscape to provide shelter for displaced creatures. This makes Volcanion a protector specifically of homeless Pokémon, a being that recognizes vulnerability and acts to address it. The legendary Pokémon of Kalos shifted focus once again, this time to cycles, the cycle of life and death, the cycle of energy through ecosystems, and even the cycle of violence and regret that AZ experienced across 3,000 years. They introduced distributed consciousness with Zygarde, showed us the consequences of weaponizing legendary Pokémon with the ultimate weapon, and gave us mythical Pokémon with reality-bending powers like Hoopa's portals. After Kalos's focus on cycles and balance, Generation 7 would take us somewhere entirely new. A region where legendary Pokémon are so integrated into daily life that they're worshipped as guardian deities, where Ultra Beasts invade from parallel dimensions, and where the very concept of what constitutes a Pokémon would be challenged. Alola was a radical departure for the Pokémon franchise in multiple ways. Based on Hawaii rather than a Japanese or European location, featuring a structure based on island trials rather than gyms, introducing regional variants of existing Pokémon, and completely reimagining how legendary Pokémon interact with human society. Where previous regions had legendary Pokémon that were rare, hidden, or involved in ancient history, Alola had legendary Pokémon that people lived alongside, worshipped openly, and interacted with as part of daily cultural practice. The most prominent legendary Pokémon in Alola are the Tapu, 4 guardian deities that watch over the region's 4 main islands. Unlike most legendary Pokémon, which are unique beings, the Tapu are explicitly deities, worshipped in shrines, honored in festivals, and expected to intervene in island affairs. They're not distant or hidden. They're active participants in Alolan society. Tapu Koko, the land spirit Pokémon, guards Melemele Island. This electric and fairy type appears as a humanoid figure encased in a shell that resembles a totem mask or ancient idol. When threatened or angered, Tapu Koko opens this shell, revealing a sleek, bird-like form underneath. Tapu Koko is known for its curiosity about humans and its willingness to test trainers, appearing before those it deems interesting and challenging them to battles that assess their worth. Tapu Koko's role as Melemele's guardian is active and involved. It doesn't just watch from afar. It intervenes in conflicts, protects the island from external threats, and even involves itself in the lives of specific trainers. In the games, Tapu Koko gives the player character their first Pokémon, immediately establishing a personal connection between the guardian deity and the protagonist. This level of direct involvement is unprecedented for legendary Pokémon. Tapu Lele, the land spirit Pokémon of Akala Island, is a psychic and fairy type, with a reputation for being capricious and dangerous despite its beautiful appearance. Tapu Lele scatters glowing scales that have healing properties, but these scales can also stimulate aggression and cause those who inhale them to become violent. This dual nature makes Tapu Lele one of the more morally complex legendary Pokémon. It genuinely helps, but its help can cause as much harm as good if not properly controlled. The duality of Tapu Lele reflects a sophisticated understanding of divine beings. They're not simply good or evil, helpful or harmful. They're powerful, and that power has consequences that don't always align with human moral categories. Tapu Lele heals because that's its nature, but the mechanism of healing has side effects that can be catastrophic. This makes Tapu Lele both revered and feared in Alolan culture. Tapu Bulu, the land spirit Pokémon of Ula Ula Island, is a grass and fairy type known for its tremendous physical strength and relatively lazy temperament. Unlike the more active Tapu Koko or the unpredictable Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu prefers to remain inactive unless absolutely necessary. When it does rouse itself to action, however, its power is devastating. Tapu Bulu can uproot entire forests with its horns, and according to legend, it once destroyed an entire village that disrespected it. This last detail is significant. Tapu Bulu destroyed a village for showing disrespect. This establishes that the Tapu, despite being worshipped as guardian deities, are not infinitely patient or forgiving. They demand respect, and they will punish those who fail to provide it. This makes them more like the capricious gods of ancient mythology than the benevolent protectors we might expect in a children's game. Tapu Fini, the land spirit Pokémon of Pony Island, is a water and fairy type that creates a special fog with purifying properties. This fog can cleanse both body and spirit, but it also has another more disturbing property. It shows people visions of deceased loved ones. These visions aren't real, just projections of memory and grief. But they're convincing enough that people sometimes lose themselves in the fog, unable to distinguish illusion from reality. Tapu Fini's fog raises questions about the ethics of comfort versus truth. The visions of deceased loved ones bring comfort to the grieving, but they're ultimately illusions, false hopes that can prevent people from accepting loss and moving forward. Is Tapu Fini helping or harming those who enter its fog? The games don't provide a clear answer, suggesting that the question itself is more important than any single response. Together, the four Tapu represent a model of legendary Pokémon as active, involved guardian deities. They're worshipped, respected, and feared in equal measure. They demand proper behavior from humans, intervene in regional affairs, and serve as both protectors and potential threats. Their presence shapes Alolan culture in profound ways, influencing architecture, the shrines and ruins found throughout the islands, social behavior, the respect shown to the guardians, and even the structure of the island challenge itself. But Alola's legendary roster extends far beyond the Tapu. The region also introduces us to beings from parallel dimensions, creatures that challenge the very definition of what a Pokémon is. Solgaleo and Lunala are the box legendaries of Sun and Moon, and they have one of the most unusual origin stories of any legendary Pokémon. These two powerful beings start life as Cosmog, a tiny psychic type that appears to be little more than a nebulous gas cloud. Cosmog is remarkably weak for a legendary Pokémon, unable to learn any offensive moves through leveling and possessing stats that make it vulnerable to almost any attack. But Cosmog is actually a larval stage. When it absorbs enough light, it evolves into Cosmoem, a dormant stage where it accumulates the energy needed for its final transformation. Then, depending on various factors that the games don't fully explain, Cosmoem evolves into either Solgaleo or Lunala. Solgaleo, the Sunne Pokémon, is a psychic and steel type that embodies the sun's radiance. Its body constantly produces light and heat, and it's said that when Solgaleo roars, the day brightens even further, as if a second sun has appeared in the sky. Solgaleo represents masculine solar energy, the active, radiant force that drives photosynthesis and powers the cycles of day and night. Lunala, the Moon Pokémon, is a psychic and ghost type that embodies the moon's mysterious light. Where Solgaleo radiates energy, Lunala absorbs it, drawing in light and converting it into power. When Lunala spreads its wings, they resemble a crescent moon, and the sky darkens as if night has fallen early. Lunala represents feminine lunar energy, the passive, receptive force that reflects and transforms the sun's light. Both Solgaleo and Lunala possess an ability that allows them to tear holes in space-time and travel to parallel dimensions. This ability is central to their lore. They're not originally from the Pokémon world we know. They come from a place called Ultra Space, a realm of parallel dimensions where entirely different forms of life have evolved. This brings us to Ultra Beasts, one of the most controversial additions to Pokémon lore. Ultra Beasts are creatures from Ultra Space that have crossed into the normal Pokémon world through Ultra wormholes. The games initially present them as distinct from Pokémon, beings so alien that normal Pokéballs struggle to contain them, requiring Beast Balls, a special variant. But as players catch and battle them, it becomes clear that despite their alien nature, Ultra Beasts function mechanically like Pokémon. They have types, stats, abilities, and moves. They can be caught, trained, and battled like any other Pokémon. This ambiguity is intentional. Ultra Beasts challenge players to question what makes something a Pokémon. Is it biological classification? Ability to be caught in a Pokeball? Native origins in the Pokémon world? If Ultra Beasts aren't Pokémon despite functioning identically to them, what does that say about the category itself? And if they are Pokémon, does that mean the concept of Pokémon extends across dimensions, applying to life forms from entirely different evolutionary histories? The Ultra Beasts introduced in Sun and Moon include Nihilego, Buzzwole, Pheromosa, Xurkitree, Celesteela, Kartana, and Guzzlord, each representing different aspects of alien life and different challenges to our expectations of what Pokémon can be. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon added Poipole and Naganadel, Ultra Beasts that can evolve, Stakataka and Blacephalon, further expanding the roster of dimensional invaders. Then there's Necrozma, perhaps the most complex and tragic legendary Pokémon in Alola's roster. Necrozma is a psychic type that appears to be made of black crystalline material, its body fragmented and incomplete. Research from Ultra Megalopolis reveals a tragic history. Necrozma was once a being of pure radiant light, revered by the people of Ultra Megalopolis as the Blinding One. It shared its light freely with their world, illuminating their dimension and allowing life to flourish. But the ancestors of the Ultra Recon Squad grew greedy. They attempted to capture and control Necrozma, seeking to harness its light-generating power for themselves. The attempt failed catastrophically. Necrozma was severely injured in the process, its body shattering, its ability to generate light destroyed. What had once been a benevolent light-bringer became a creature in constant, agonizing pain, desperate to absorb any light it could find, just to ease its suffering. Professor Kukui and Lily theorize that fragments of Necrozma's shattered body fell through ultra wormholes into Alola, becoming the Z crystals and sparkling stones that enable Z moves. If this theory is correct, then every Z move used in Alola carries a fragment of Necrozma's original power. In its desperate state, Necrozma stole all the light from Ultra Megalopolis, plunging that dimension into perpetual darkness. The inhabitants imprisoned it within Megalo Tower, attempting to contain the threat they had created. But Necrozma would eventually escape, seeking Solgaleo or Lunala to absorb their light and temporarily ease its pain by fusing with them. Necrozma has the ability to fuse with Solgaleo or Lunala, creating Duskmane Necrozma or Dawn Wings Necrozma, respectively. In these forms, Necrozma absorbs the light generated by its host, partially easing its pain but also enslaving the other legendary Pokémon. When Necrozma absorbs enough light, it can access its original form, Ultra Necrozma, a being of such radiant power that it illuminates the entire sky, transforming night into day and overpowering almost any opposition. Necrozma's story is deeply tragic because it demonstrates how exploitation and greed can corrupt even beings of pure benevolence. It's not evil by nature. It's a victim of humanity's overreach, now condemned to an existence of constant suffering and desperate searching for something that was stolen from it. Alola also introduced several other legendary and mythical Pokémon. Type, Null and its evolution. Silverly were created by the Ether Foundation as synthetic Pokémon designed to fight Ultra Beasts. Type, Null wears a helmet that restrains its power, and when that helmet is removed through high friendship with its trainer, it evolves into Silvally. Silvally can change its type using memory disks, making it adaptable enough to counter any threat. It represents a more successful attempt at creating artificial legendary Pokémon compared to Mewtwo's troubled origin. Type, Null and Silverly integrate into their roles without rebelling against their creators. Marshadow is a fighting and ghost-type mythical Pokémon that hides in shadows, observing and learning from the techniques of great warriors. According to what little information exists about it, Marshadow is so elusive that its very existence is questioned within the Pokémon world itself, with most people dismissing reports of it as folklore. This makes it one of the truest mythical Pokémon, a being whose existence blurs into pure legend. Morgana is a steel and fairy type created through human craftsmanship approximately 500 years before the modern era, making it the oldest known constructed Pokémon. Unlike Mewtwo, Genesect, or Type, Null, which were created for combat or utility purposes, Morgana was created as a gift, a work of art and engineering designed to embody the pinnacle of ancient Pokémon science. Its core, the Soul Heart, gives it true consciousness and the ability to experience genuine emotions. Morgana represents the positive potential of creating artificial life, beauty, companionship, and wonder rather than warfare. Zeraora is an electric type that moves at speeds approaching that of lightning itself. Legends tell of how Zeraora once fought alongside humans to protect Pokémon during a devastating forest fire, demonstrating that even mysterious mythical Pokémon can form bonds with humanity and act heroically. Within the Pokémon world, its existence remains debated by scholars, with some suggesting it's simply a particularly fast electric type that's been mythologized over time. Finally, there's Meltan and Melmetal, mythical Pokémon discovered through Pokémon Go's integration with the main series games. Meltan appears as a small liquid metal Pokémon with a hex nut for a head. When many Meltan gather together, they can fuse into Melmetal, a massive steel type with tremendous strength. These Pokémon represent the evolution of mythical Pokémon distribution into the mobile gaming era, beings that exist across multiple platforms and require new forms of interaction to obtain. Alola's legendary Pokémon pushed boundaries in multiple directions. Guardian deities actively involved in regional culture, beings from parallel dimensions that challenge what we mean by Pokémon, a tragic light stealer in constant pain, and mythical Pokémon that span multiple gaming platforms. After Alola, the franchise would need to find new ground to explore, new ways to expand the mythology without simply repeating what had come before. Generation 8 would answer this challenge by looking backward and forward simultaneously, backward to ancient heroes and long-sealed catastrophes, forward to new forms of energy and transformation that would reshape Pokémon battles forever. Galar, based on Great Britain, brought Pokémon into a new era with the Dynamax phenomenon, the ability for Pokémon to temporarily grow to enormous size and gain tremendous power. But this seemingly modern development was actually rooted in ancient history, in a catastrophe so severe that it nearly destroyed the region, and in two heroes whose actions saved Galar, but whose legend was twisted and distorted over time. The central story of Galar's legendary Pokémon revolves around an event called the Darkest Day. According to the official history taught to Galarian children, approximately 3,000 years ago, a terrible disaster threatened to destroy the region. Pokémon began appearing that had grown to enormous size, rampaging across the land and causing massive destruction. Into this crisis came two heroes, accompanied by legendary sword and shield Pokémon. The heroes defeated the enormous Pokémon, sealed away the source of the disaster, and saved Galar. This story is commemorated in tapestries, statues, and cultural celebrations across the region. But the truth, as revealed through the game's story, is far more complex and disturbing. The Darkest Day wasn't caused by natural disaster or spontaneous Pokémon growth. It was caused by Eternatus. Eternatus, the gigantic Pokémon, is a poison and dragon type that came from space approximately 20,000 years ago. This alien entity crashed into Galar, and its mere presence caused the Darkest Day, a period when the sky filled with red clouds. Energy radiated across the region, causing Pokémon to Dynamax uncontrollably, and civilization teetered on the brink of collapse. Eternatus doesn't appear to be malicious in an intentional sense. It's more akin to a natural disaster given physical form, a being whose very existence releases what are now called Galar particles, the energy that causes the Dynamax phenomenon. When Eternatus is fully active, it can access its Eternamax form, a state where it becomes so massive that normal Pokeballs cannot contain it, and its power level exceeds that of almost any other Pokémon in existence. In this form, Eternatus appears almost mechanical, a vast serpentine entity with a core that resembles a perpetual energy generator. The two heroes who supposedly stopped the Darkest Day weren't humans wielding weapons. They were Pokémon themselves, Zacian and Zamazenta, the warrior Pokémon that have protected Galar for countless generations. Zacian, the warrior Pokémon, is a fairy type in its hero of many battles form. But when it holds the rusted sword in its mouth, it transforms into its crowned sword form, gaining steel type in addition to fairy. In this form, Zacian's offensive power becomes extraordinary, its blade capable of cutting through virtually anything. Zacian embodies the principle of overwhelming offense, the ability to strike down threats before they can cause harm. Zamazenta, the warrior Pokémon, is a fighting type in its hero of many battles form, and when it holds the rusted shield, it transforms into its crowned shield form, also gaining steel type. Zamazenta's defense becomes legendary in this form, its shield capable of withstanding devastating attacks. Where Zacian represents the sword that cuts down evil, Zamazenta represents the shield that protects the innocent. These two Pokémon, working in tandem, fought Eternatus during the original Darkest Day. They couldn't destroy it entirely. An entity like Eternatus appears too fundamental, too tied to the energy of the universe itself to simply eliminate. Instead, they sealed it away deep beneath what would become the Gala region's power spot network, forcing Eternatus into dormancy where its influence would be minimized. But here's where the legend takes a darker turn. The heroes weren't the ones who released Eternatus in the modern era. Humans did. Chairman Rose of the Gala Pokémon League deliberately awakens Eternatus because he's concerned about an energy crisis he projects will strike Gala in approximately 1,000 years. He believes that by capturing Eternatus and harnessing its Galar particle generation, he can solve this hypothetical future crisis. Instead, he triggers a second Darkest Day, demonstrating that humanity's tendency to exploit legendary Pokémon for power remains dangerously consistent across millennia. This makes Galar's legendary story particularly sobering. The heroes saved the region once, went into hiding to rest through the ages, and then had to emerge again because humanity repeated the exact same mistake, awakening the exact same threat, driven by the exact same impulse to harness power they didn't fully understand or respect. The legend also reveals something significant about how history is recorded and remembered. The official story taught throughout Gala says the heroes were humans. Statues depict them as people holding swords and shields. Only those who dig deeper, who investigate ancient texts and listen to voices from the margins, discover that the heroes were actually Pokémon. This transformation of the historical record suggests that in the Pokémon world, as in ours, history often gets rewritten to center humans, rather than acknowledging the actual agents of change. Galar also introduced regional variants of the legendary birds from Kanto, Galarian Articuno, Galarian Zapdos, and Galarian Moltres. These birds appear similar enough to their Cantonian counterparts to share names, but possess radically different types and abilities, raising intriguing questions about legendary Pokémon variation and whether these names refer to species categories rather than unique individuals. Galarian Articuno is a psychic and flying type, its plumage violet instead of blue, projecting waves of psychic energy rather than ice. Galarian Zapdos is a fighting and flying type, its coloration orange instead of yellow, delivering devastating kicks rather than electric shocks. Galarian Moltres is a dark and flying type, its flames purple and ominous rather than red and bright, burning with what appears to be malevolent energy rather than natural fire. The existence of these regional variants opens up several interpretive possibilities. Perhaps Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres aren't names of individual legendary Pokémon, but rather titles or species designations, with multiple individuals existing across different regions who evolved under different environmental pressures. Alternatively, exposure to different regional energies or ecosystems might cause legendary Pokémon to adapt and transform over generations. The games deliberately avoid providing a definitive answer, allowing the mystery to persist. Then there's Calyrex, the king Pokémon, a psychic and grass type that once ruled over the crown tundra region of Galar. According to ancient stories, Calyrex was a beloved ruler who helped human settlers survive in the harsh tundra environment by showing them where to plant crops and how to work with the land. But over time, as civilization advanced and people needed Calyrex's help less, the legendary Pokémon was forgotten, reduced from a king to a legend to a barely remembered myth. Calyrex's story is one of fading relevance, a being whose power and importance diminish as humanity becomes more self-sufficient. This raises poignant questions about the relationship between legendary Pokémon and human memory. Do legendary Pokémon need to be remembered and believed in to maintain their power? Or does their power remain constant while only their influence over human affairs wanes? Calyrex has the ability to bond with one of two steed Pokémon, Glastria or Spectria. Glastria is an ice-type horse whose hooves are so cold they freeze the ground with every step. Spectria is a ghost-type horse that moves silently and can phase through solid objects. When Calyrex rides one of these steeds, it gains their typing in addition to its own, becoming either Ice Rider Calyrex or Shadow Rider Calyrex, forms that grant it enhanced power and mobility. The DLC Crown Tundra also introduced Regieleki and Regidrago, new members of the Regi family created by Regigigas. Regieleki is formed from pure electrical energy, its body a containment vessel holding electrical power equivalent to all of Galar's power plants combined. Regidrago is formed from crystallized dragon energy, but it's incomplete. Regigigas ran out of material before finishing it. Only Regidrago's head was completed, leaving it as a partial creation that nevertheless possesses tremendous power. The incompleteness of Regidrago is significant. It suggests that even beings as powerful as Regigigas have limitations. That even the continent shaper can run out of resources or energy. It also raises questions. What would a complete Regidrago be like? Would it rival Regigigas itself in power? Is its incomplete state actually a safety measure, preventing the creation of something too powerful to control? Galar also introduced two mythical Pokémon with unique origins: Kubfu and its evolution. Urshifu are fighting types from a distant region, brought to Galar to train under masters of martial arts. Kubfu is earnest and dedicated, embodying the student's mindset. When it completes its training at one of two towers, the Tower of Darkness or the Tower of Waters, it evolves into Urshifu in either single strike style or rapid strike style. Single strike style Urshifu is fighting and dark type, embodying focused, decisive strikes that end battles quickly. Rapid strike style Urshifu is fighting and water type, embodying flowing, continuous attacks that wear down opponents through persistence. Both styles are equally valid, representing different martial philosophies, different approaches to combat and life. Zarude is a dark and grass-type mythical Pokémon that lives in packs deep in forests. Unlike most mythical Pokémon, which are solitary, Zarude exists as a social species with established hierarchies and communities. This makes Zarude unique, a mythical Pokémon that nonetheless has a society, a culture, relationships beyond the individual. It raises questions about what we mean by mythical if multiple individuals exist and interact. The legendary Pokémon of Galar expanded the mythology by examining how legends change over time, how truth becomes distorted by cultural needs and human-centric narratives. They gave us heroes that weren't human, a king forgotten by his subjects, regional variants that challenge our understanding of legendary identity, and mythical Pokémon that exist in social groups. After 8 generations, the legendary roster had grown enormously, encompassing creators of reality, guardians of nature, embodiments of ideals, and everything in between. But the series wasn't done yet. Generation 9 would introduce some of the most conceptually challenging legendary Pokémon yet. Beings that exist as temporal paradoxes. Guardians imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit, and a creature whose very nature allows it to transform the fundamental properties of other Pokémon. Paldea, the Pokémon world's version of the Iberian Peninsula, brought the series into a new era of open-world exploration, non-linear storytelling, and legendary Pokémon that challenged basic assumptions about time, causality, and the nature of existence itself. The legendary roster of Generation 9 is particularly ambitious, introducing concepts like temporal paradoxes, crystalline transformation, and legendary Pokémon that exist as living contradictions. The box legendaries of Pokémon Scarlet and Violet are Koraidon and Miraidon, and they represent one of the most fascinating concepts in legendary Pokémon lore. They are paradox Pokémon from different time periods. Koraidon in Scarlet is said to be an ancient Pokémon from the distant past, a prehistoric form related to the Cyclizar species found in modern Paldea. Its design incorporates elements that suggest advanced biological features, efficient musculature, optimized movement patterns, characteristics that seem almost too sophisticated for a prehistoric creature. This is where the paradox comes in. Koraidon appears to come from the past, but its features seem more advanced than what would have evolved naturally in that time period. Miraidon, in Violet, is supposedly a Pokémon from the far future, a high-tech version of Cyclizar that has incorporated mechanical and electronic components into its biology. It moves using anti-gravity propulsion, generates electricity through advanced biological systems, and possesses features that suggest millions of years of further evolution. But here's the paradox. If Miraidon is from the future, how can it exist in the present? How can we encounter and interact with something that hasn't been created yet? The games deliberately leave the true nature of Koraidon and Miraidon ambiguous. Are they actually from the past and future, or are they something else entirely? Some in-game theories suggest they might be products of human imagination, made real through unknown means, creatures that exist because people believed they could exist. Others propose they might be artificial creations, designed to look like past or future Pokémon. The games present evidence for multiple interpretations and refuse to confirm any single answer. This ambiguity is crucial to understanding Generation 9's approach to legendary Pokémon. Where previous generations provided definitive lore, Paldea often presents conflicting accounts and lets players decide what they believe. This reflects a more mature storytelling approach, one that acknowledges that myths and legends in real cultures often have multiple versions, contradictory details, and no single authoritative truth. Both Koraidon and Miraidon have multiple forms tied to their abilities. They start in a limited form, but gradually unlock abilities to dash, jump, swim, glide, and climb as the player progresses through the story. This progression mirrors the player's exploration of Paldea, making these legendary Pokémon partners in discovery rather than simple mounts or tools. Their transformation into their ultimate forms represents not just power increases, but the restoration of their full capabilities, recovering what was lost or damaged. The DLC introduced additional Paradox Pokémon, both past and future variants of existing species, further blurring the line between normal Pokémon and legendary status. If Paradox Pokémon can be created or accessed, if they're not unique individuals but entire species from different time periods, what does that mean for the concept of legendary Pokémon as rare, unique beings? The Treasures of Ruin represent a completely different aspect of Paldea's legendary mythology. These 4 Pokémon are not guardians or protectors. They are malevolent entities sealed away by ancient Paldeans, because their very existence brought disaster. Wo-Chien, the ruinous Pokémon, is a dark and grass type that embodies resentment and grudges. According to legend, it was formed from a wooden tablet that absorbed the negative emotions of ancient people, growing into a snail-like creature that spreads misfortune wherever it goes. Wo-Chien can drain the life from plants and cause crops to fail, creating famines and ecological collapse. Chien-Pao, the ruinous Pokémon, is a dark and ice type formed from a ceremonial sword that absorbed hatred and malice. This leopard-like creature brings brutal, cold, and violent impulses to those around it, turning allies against each other and freezing compassion in people's hearts. Chien-Pao represents how implements of war can become cursed by the violence they inflict. Ting-Lu, the ruinous Pokémon, is a dark and ground type formed from a ritual vessel used in ancient sacrifices. The negative energy of fear, desperation, and loss that accompanied those sacrifices coalesced into this massive elk-like being that brings earthquakes and land collapse wherever it walks. Ting-Lu embodies how religious practices, even well-intentioned ones, can create unintended negative consequences. Chi-Yu, the ruinous Pokémon, is a dark and fire type formed from ceremonial beads that absorbed the envy and jealousy of ancient people. This fish-like creature spreads flames that destroy not just physically, but spiritually, burning away bonds of trust and friendship, leaving only suspicion and rivalry in its wake. Chi-Yu represents how social comparison and resentment can burn down communities from within. These 4 treasures of ruin are sealed in different locations across Paldea, their prisons maintained by stakes that channel energy to keep them contained. The player can remove these stakes and release the treasures, which raises an interesting moral question. Should these beings remain imprisoned? They didn't choose to become what they are. They're objects that absorbed negative human emotions and gained consciousness. Are they responsible for what they've become, or are they victims of humanity's negativity? The treasures of ruin also introduce a new type of legendary Pokémon. Not guardians or world shapers, but curses made manifest, negative energy given form and consciousness. They're not malevolent by choice. They're made of malevolence itself. This makes them both tragic and dangerous, beings that should be pitied and feared simultaneously. Then there are the loyal 3, Okidogi, Munkidori, and Fezandipiti. These 3 Pokémon were introduced in the Teal Mask DLC and have one of the most interesting stories in recent Pokémon lore. According to the legends told in the Kitakami region, the Loyal 3 were heroes who gave their lives protecting the village from an ogre. Monuments were built in their honor, festivals celebrate their sacrifice, and they're remembered as noble protectors. But the truth, as revealed through the DLC's story, is exactly the opposite. The Loyal 3 were petty thieves who stole masks from Ogerpon, the actual hero. When Ogerpon defended itself, the villagers misunderstood the situation and assumed Ogerpon was the aggressor. The Loyal 3 were killed in the conflict, but they became heroes in death, their true nature forgotten or deliberately obscured. This is one of the darkest twists in Pokémon storytelling. An entire culture built around celebrating villains and persecuting a hero based on a fundamental misunderstanding. It comments on how history is written by survivors, how truth can be lost or deliberately altered, and how innocent beings can be demonized, while the guilty are praised. Ogerpon itself is a grass-type legendary Pokémon with 4 masks, each providing different powers. The Teal Mask grants Ogerpon its base form. The Wellspring Mask makes it Water-type, the Hearthflame Mask makes it Fire-type, and the Cornerstone Mask makes it Rock-type. Ogerpon represents the persecuted outsider, the being that society has judged wrongly and continues to fear despite being innocent. The story of Ogerpon and the Loyal 3 is particularly powerful because it's eventually resolved. The player learns the truth, helps clear Ogerpon's name, and begins the process of correcting the historical record. It's one of the few times in the franchise where a legendary Pokémon story has a genuinely happy ending, where justice is actually served, and truth prevails over comfortable lies. The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero DLC introduced Terrapagos, perhaps the most significant legendary Pokémon in Paldea's lore. Terrapagos is a normal type in its normal form, a tiny turtle-like creature that seems unremarkable. But this small being is actually the source of the terrestrial phenomenon, the crystallization energy that allows Pokémon throughout Paldea to temporarily change their types. When Terrapagos enters battle, it transforms into its terrestrial form, growing larger and encasing itself in a crystalline shell. In this form, its power increases dramatically, and it can use the move Terra Starstorm, which rains crystalline energy on opponents. But Terrapagos has a third form, Stellar form, accessible only in specific circumstances. In this form, Terrapagos becomes a stellar type, a new type that exists only for this single Pokémon, and its power reaches levels that exceed almost any other legendary Pokémon. Terrapagos's connection to the terrestrial phenomenon makes it one of the most important legendary Pokémon in terms of gameplay impact. Every Pokémon in Paldea can terrestrialize because Terrapagos exists and radiates this energy. It's a being whose very presence has altered the fundamental nature of Pokémon battles throughout an entire region. This makes Terrapagos similar to Eternatus in Galar, a creature whose energy field causes a regional phenomenon that shapes how battles are conducted. The lore suggests that Terrapagos has been sleeping beneath Area Zero for an enormous length of time, possibly millions of years. During this time, its energy has been leaking into the surrounding area, creating the unique ecosystem of Area Zero where paradox Pokémon appear and normal Pokémon behave strangely. It's essentially a living generator of reality-altering energy, and its presence has transformed Paldea in ways that residents don't even fully realize. Finally, there's Pecharunt, the subjugation Pokémon, a poison and ghost-type mythical Pokémon that ties directly into the Loyal Three's story. Pecharunt was actually the mastermind behind the Loyal Three's theft, using its ability to control others through binding Mochi to manipulate them into stealing Ogerpon's masks. When the theft went wrong and the Loyal Three were killed, Pecharunt encased itself in a shell and lay dormant for years. Pecharunt represents manipulation and control, the ability to override others' wills and force them to act according to your desires. It's not physically powerful, but its ability to puppeteer others makes it dangerous in a different way. The fact that it was responsible for the Loyal Three's villainy adds another layer to that story. The three thieves were themselves victims, controlled by a being they couldn't resist. The legendary Pokémon of Paldea pushed the boundaries of what these beings could represent. We got temporal paradoxes that challenge basic causality, cursed objects given life, heroes and villains whose roles were deliberately reversed in cultural memory, a turtle that powers an entire region's special battle mechanic, and a puppeteer that turns others into its unwilling servants. Generation 9 demonstrated that even after 9 generations and over 90 legendary and mythical Pokémon, the series could still find new ground to explore, new concepts to introduce, new stories to tell. We've now journeyed through 9 generations of Pokémon games. encountering over 90 legendary and mythical Pokémon, each with their own lore, powers, and significance. But one of the most remarkable aspects of Pokémon mythology is how these legends connect across regions and generations, forming a web of relationships and references that reveals deeper truths about the Pokémon universe. Consider the relationship between creation myths across regions. Sinnoh tells us that Arceus created the universe, birthing Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina to shape space, time, and antimatter. But Hoenn has its own creation story involving Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza shaping land and sea. How do these myths coexist? The answer seems to be that Arceus created the fundamental framework of reality, while other legendary Pokémon worked within that framework to shape specific aspects of the world. Arceus made space and time possible. Kyogre and Groudon used that space to create continents and oceans. This hierarchical structure extends throughout legendary lore. At the top, Arceus as the creator of everything. Below it, the creation trio shaping fundamental forces. Below them, legendary Pokémon that shape specific aspects of reality. Kyogre and Groudon shaping geography, the legendary birds shaping weather, Ho-Oh creating life, and Yveltal ending it, and so on. Each tier operates within the constraints established by higher tiers, creating a consistent cosmic order. But this hierarchy isn't strictly enforced in terms of power levels. Eternatus in its Eternamax form has stats that exceed even Arceus. Mega Rayquaza can achieve power levels beyond most of the creation trio. This suggests that while Arceus may have created everything, it didn't necessarily retain all power for itself. Creation might actually require distributing power, granting other beings the capability to act independently. Time-related legendary Pokémon offer particularly interesting connections. Dialga controls time's fundamental flow, but Celebi can travel through it. Does Celebi's ability work because Dialga allows it? Or does time travel operate on principles separate from Dialga's domain? When Hooper summons legendary Pokémon from across space, is it working within Palkia's domain or outside it? These questions don't have definitive answers, suggesting that legendary Pokémon powers sometimes overlap or interact in complex ways. Regional variations like the Galarian legendary birds suggest that some legendary Pokémon might actually be species rather than individuals. If there can be both Cantonian and Galarian Articuno, perhaps Articuno is a type of Pokémon rather than a specific being. This would explain how trainers across different timelines and universes can all encounter and catch supposedly unique legendary Pokémon. The concept of ultraspace introduced in Alola adds another layer of complexity. If parallel dimensions exist where different versions of reality play out, could there be dimensions where different legendary Pokémon exist? Could there be a reality where Dialga never emerged from Arceus, where time simply doesn't exist? Could there be worlds where the Tau trio never split, where the original dragon still reigns? The games hint at these possibilities without confirming them. Mythical Pokémon like Mew Jirachi, Manaphy, and Victini often have powers that seem disproportionate to their size and apparent strength. Mew contains all Pokémon DNA. Jirachi grants wishes. Victini ensures victory. These abilities are less about direct power and more about manipulating fundamental aspects of reality in subtle ways. They represent a different category of legendary Pokémon, not world shapers or guardians, but beings that embody possibilities and potentials. The dark side of legendary Pokémon mythology also connects across generations. Mewtwo, Genesect, Type, Null, and Silvally are all artificial legendary Pokémon created by humans. Each represents a different outcome of that creation. Mewtwo rebelled. Genesect remains unclear about its identity. Type, Null, Silvally integrated successfully. Together, they tell a story about humanity's relationship with legendary Pokémon, our drive to create or control beings of power, and the ethical implications of doing so. The ultimate weapons of Kalos, powered by Xerneas or Yveltal's life-death energy, parallel Gala's exploitation of Eternatus for power. Both regions have histories where humans tried to weaponize legendary Pokémon, and both times the result was catastrophic. This pattern suggests a consistent theme. Legendary Pokémon are not tools to be exploited. Attempts to use them for human purposes inevitably lead to disaster. Environmental guardians appear across multiple regions. The legendary birds of Kanto, the beast trio of Johto, the forces of nature in Unova, the Tapu of Alola, all serve similar roles in maintaining ecological balance. They represent the idea that nature requires powerful protectors, beings that can counter human interference and maintain equilibrium. In regions where these guardians are respected and honored, ecosystems thrive. Where they're ignored or opposed, environmental problems emerge. Creation and destruction exist in balance across multiple regions. Xerneas and Yveltal in Kalos, Solgaleo and Lunala in Alola, representing day and night, life and death cycles. Reshiram and Zekrom in Unova, representing creative idealism and destructive truth, all embody necessary oppositions. The mythology consistently suggests that destruction isn't evil. It's necessary for renewal, for making space for new growth. The role of human memory and belief appears in several legendary stories. Calyrex loses power as it's forgotten. The loyal three become heroes through false belief. Ogerpon is persecuted because people believe lies about it. This suggests that in the Pokémon world, belief might actually affect reality, that legendary Pokémon's power or role can be influenced by how humans think about them. Sealed legendary Pokémon appear in multiple generations. Kyurem, the treasures of ruin, the swords of justice. Opponents in the ancient war. These beings were imprisoned rather than destroyed because destruction might not be possible or might cause worse problems. This introduces an interesting principle. Some forces are too fundamental to eliminate, so the best solution is containment and management, rather than annihilation. The paradox Pokémon of Paldea connect to concepts of time that Dialga established and that Celebi demonstrated. If time is mutable, if past and future can intrude on the present, then paradox Pokémon become possible. They're consequences of time not being fixed, of the universe allowing temporal anomalies under certain conditions. Legendary Pokémon relationships often mirror human relationships. The twin heroes and the original dragon split over philosophical differences, just as human friends and families split over beliefs. Latias and Latios care for each other as siblings. The Tapu act as parental figures to their islands. This anthropomorphization makes legendary Pokémon more relatable, while also suggesting that consciousness and emotion follow similar patterns regardless of power level. The mythology also reveals attitudes toward power itself. Lugia restrains its power out of wisdom. Mewtwo struggles with its power's origins. Necrozma's power causes it constant pain. Legendary Pokémon don't exist in a simple state where power equals happiness. Often, the most powerful beings are the most burdened, the most isolated, the most tragic. Finally, the recurring theme of balance appears across all generations. Balance between land and sea, truth and ideals, life and death, creation and destruction, order and chaos. The Pokémon universe seems to require opposition and tension to function properly. Whenever balance shifts too far in one direction, other legendary Pokémon emerge to restore equilibrium. This suggests a universe that's fundamentally cyclical and self-correcting, where extremes are always temporary and balance is always eventually restored. We've completed our journey through 9 generations of Pokémon games, exploring the lore, history, and significance of every legendary and mythical Pokémon introduced from Kanto through Paldea. From Articuno's icy wings to Terrapagos's crystalline power. From Mewtwo's tragic creation to Ogerpon's stolen legacy, we've witnessed creation myths, apocalyptic battles, temporal paradoxes, and philosophical conflicts. What makes legendary Pokémon so enduring, so captivating, that the franchise has created over 90 of them across 25 years? The answer lies in what these beings represent. Legendary Pokémon are more than just rare, powerful creatures to catch and battle. They're embodiments of fundamental forces and concepts. They represent the world's creation and the forces that maintain it. They embody the tension between opposing principles, truth and ideals, life and death, order and chaos. They serve as guardians, protectors, and sometimes threats, reminding us that power without wisdom is dangerous, that strength carries responsibility. These beings also serve as storytelling devices that allow the Pokémon franchise to explore complex themes. Through Mewtwo, the games examine the ethics of artificial life creation. Through the Weather Trio, they explore environmental balance and the danger of extremes. Through the Tao Trio, They tackle philosophical questions about truth versus idealism. Through the treasures of ruin, they show how negative human emotions can take on dangerous forms. The mythology of legendary Pokémon has grown more sophisticated with each generation. Early legendaries were relatively simple, rare, powerful Pokémon with elemental themes. By Generation 4, we had a complete creation mythology rivaling real-world religious cosmologies. By Generation 9, we had temporal paradoxes, cultural lies becoming accepted truth, and beings whose very existence questions our understanding of reality. Yet, despite this increasing complexity, the core appeal remains constant. Legendary Pokémon represent the extraordinary within a world of ordinary creatures. They're the myths and legends that give texture and depth to the Pokémon universe. They're the beings that make us wonder what might exist beyond our normal experience. What powers might be slumbering in ancient ruins or soaring through distant skies. For players who engage deeply with the lore, legendary Pokémon provide rich narrative satisfaction. Their stories connect across regions and generations, forming an intricate web of myths that reveal deeper truths about the Pokémon world. For players who simply enjoy collecting powerful Pokémon, these beings offer challenging encounters and valuable team members. The franchise has successfully made legendary Pokémon meaningful on multiple levels simultaneously. The future of legendary Pokémon mythology remains open. Each new generation will likely introduce new legendary and mythical Pokémon, expanding the roster and adding new dimensions to the lore. Will we eventually reach a point where there are too many legendary Pokémon, where the concept loses meaning because it's been diluted? Or will each new edition continue to find fresh ground to explore, new concepts to embody, new stories to tell? Based on the evidence of 9 generations, the franchise shows no signs of running out of ideas. From cosmic creators to temporal paradoxes, from guardian deities to cursed objects. From embodiments of ideals to victims of human ambition, legendary Pokémon have consistently found new ways to be meaningful and interesting. As long as the games continue to treat these beings with the respect and narrative significance they deserve, as long as each legendary Pokémon is given proper lore and context, rather than simply being added to increase the roster, the mythology can continue growing indefinitely. What remains constant is the sense of wonder these beings inspire. Whether you're encountering Articuno in the Seafoam Islands for the first time, watching Rayquaza descend from the sky to stop Kyogre and Groudon, capturing Dialga at the Spear Pillar, or riding alongside Koraidon or Miraidon through Paldea's landscapes, legendary Pokémon create moments that stay with players long after they've put down the game. These are the beings that make the Pokémon world feel vast, ancient, and full of mysteries yet to be discovered. They remind us that the world is bigger than any single trainer's journey, that forces beyond human understanding shape reality, that power and wisdom must work together, and that even the mightiest beings can be tragic, lonely, or misunderstood. The story of legendary Pokémon is ultimately a story about what we value, what we fear, what we aspire to, and how we understand our place in the universe. Through these beings, the Pokémon franchise has built a mythology that resonates across cultures and generations, that grows more complex with each new entry, while never losing sight of what makes these beings special. As we close this comprehensive exploration, one truth remains clear. Legendary Pokémon will continue to captivate imaginations, inspire stories, and add depth to the Pokémon universe for as long as the franchise exists. They are the crown jewels of Pokémon mythology, the beings that transform a world of creature collection into an epic spanning creation, destruction, and everything in between. Thank you for joining me on this journey through legendary and mythical Pokémon lore. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Pokémon mythology, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to Poke Dreams for more comprehensive explorations of Pokémon history, lore, and facts. Let me know in the comments which legendary Pokémon is your favorite and why, or which legendary story resonates with you most strongly. Whether your favorite is the elegant ice of Articuno, the tragic power of Mewtwo, the cosmic significance of Arceus, the philosophical depth of Reshiram and Zekrom, or the paradoxical nature of Koraidon and Miraidon, each legendary and mythical Pokémon has something unique to offer. They are testaments to the creative depth of the Pokémon franchise, proof that games can tell meaningful stories and explore profound themes while still being accessible and enjoyable. Until next time, may your encounters with legendary Pokémon be blessed with luck, and may the myths and legends of the Pokémon world continue to inspire wonder in all of us. The journey through legendary lore never truly ends. There are always new stories to discover, new connections to make, new mysteries to unravel. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift these magnificent beings give us. The promise that there's always something more to explore, always another legend waiting to be told.